Hello, welcome, good evening. We have no one viewing because no one knows I'm doing this. I'm going to see if I can find someone who will come along and join. Let me get a link. Where do I drop a link? Invite. That's it. Copy. You can join here. Here's a link to join. I'm going to just read from the Lives of the Saints until someone shows up. I wonder if I can get an alert when someone shows up. I don't know. I don't have anyone watching. I don't have the right one for today either. Oh well. Everyone's out busy on a Friday night. Good. Why do I have that song in my head? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I guess I'll just read Lives of the Saints. What do we got? Oh, I'll pull up today's Lives of the Saints. That is not a long life to read. This is the most boring stream of all time. I'm sorry. No one's watching it, so it doesn't matter. It's okay. Right believing the life. No. There are not a lot of Lives of the Saints today. Okay, well, we'll go with tomorrow. Martyr Caratina of Asimos. Let's share the screen. How about that? In here, and let's go to present, share screen. That's it. Share. Okay. The martyr Caratina of Amisos. Saint Caratina was from Asimos in Pontus and lived during the reign of Emperor Diocletian. Orphaned at a young age, she became the servant of a noble Roman Christian named Claudius, who brought her up as his own daughter. The young girl was very pretty, sensible, and kind. She imparted her love for Christ to others and brought many to the path of salvation. Saint Caratina was meek, humble, obedient, and silent. Although she was not yet baptized, she was a Christian at heart. She studied the law of God day and night and vowed to preserve her virginity as a true bride of Christ. Because Saint Caratina brought many others to the Christian faith. Oh, I got to turn off the air conditioner. Domitius, one of Emperor Diocletian's governors, came to hear of her and sent a letter to Claudius, ordering him to send Caratina to him so that he might question her. Claudius had no doubts about the result of this interrogation. Grieved at the prospect of losing her, he put on sackcloth and wept bitter tears. Caratina comforted him, saying, "Do not grieve, my master, but rejoice, for I am to become an acceptable sacrifice to God for my sins and for yours." Claudius replied, "O servant of God, remember me when you stand before the heavenly king in the ranks of the holy martyrs." The saint was brought before a judge at the tribunal. He asked her, "Is it true that you are a Christian and that you delude others by bringing them to your impious faith?" Caratina replied, "It is true that I am a Christian, but it is a lie that I delude others. On the contrary, I lead them from deception to the path of truth, bringing them to my Christ." Then the judge ordered her hair to be cut off, but by the power of God, her hair grew back even longer than before. Then burning coals were placed on her head, and vinegar was poured over her scorched flesh, increasing her pain. They drove flaming sticks through her breasts and burnt her sides with candles. Finally, they tied a stone around her neck and threw her into the sea. She cried out, "This is my baptism." Suddenly the stone was loosened and sank, and God delivered her from the sea unharmed. When the judge saw her at the shore, he ordered his men to seize her and strip her naked, and then tie her to a wheel which turned over burning coals. But an angel of God stopped the wheel, and once again Saint Caratina remained unharmed. The judge became furious and ordered that the nails of her hands and her feet be torn out, and that all her teeth be broken. Then the wicked judge sent many dissolute men to rape her. Fearing this dishonor, Saint Caratina prayed that God would receive her soul before these vile men could defile her virginal body. And so, as she prayed, she surrendered her pure soul to God. When the judge saw that she was dead, he had her body placed in a sack weighted with stones and tossed it into the sea. By divine providence, her body was brought to the shore 3 days later. Her master Claudius found her body and buried her with appropriate honor and reverence. Fragments of Saint Caratina's holy relics are found in the monasteries of Kikos, Cyprus, and Jerusalem of Boeotia. Let's see if anyone's here. Oh, I got 2 people here. Oh, hello. Welcome. I do not know who's here. I was just reading Lives of the Saints while I was waiting for people to come. Let me look at the comments. Here we go. Risto. Hello. Hello, Risto. Why wasn't she baptized? I don't know. Let's see. Because she was orphaned at a young age. That's why. So she became the servant of a noble Roman Christian, Claudius, who brought her up as his own daughter. I think there was also at that time a lot of people waited until later in their life to be baptized because they didn't want to foul their baptismal robe. In other words, they kind of wanted to wait until they were dying or their deathbed. But that's just speculation on my part. I don't know exactly why she was not baptized before this point. But as far as I understand, that was kind of a common practice in the early days of the church. Although this is like 3rd century, so I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I'll read. I didn't know what else to do. I was just trying to fire up a stream, so I guess I'll read another Life of the Saint. This is for tomorrow. There weren't many to pick from today. Actually, like all of them are only like a paragraph long. So I will see who else is for today. Let's look. The Synaxis, that one's not very long. Venerable Damien, the healer, Jeremiah and Matthew. This isn't very long. I'll read it. Saints Damien, the presbyter and healer, Jeremiah and Matthew, clairvoyants of the Kiev caves, near caves, were described by Saint Nestor the chronicler. Saint Damien remembered the baptism of Rus, the jealous imitator of Saint Theodius, was gentle, industrious, and obedient to the joy of all the brethren. He spent the entire night at prayer and reading the divine scriptures. Saint Damien was strict in fasting and ate nothing but bread and water. The Lord rewarded him with the gift of treating ailments. Saint Jeremiah had the gift of the Lord to see into the future and to see into the moral condition of a person. He died at an old age. In the iconographer's manual, it says, Matthew has the appearance of a clairvoyant elder with a black grayish beard like Blas, in black klobuk, a monastic robe, hands pressed to the heart. The general troparion to these saints is, your hearts were enlightened with the light of Christ's commandments, and you dispelled the dread darkness. Like an abode of the Trinity, from whom we receive grace, O Fathers Damien, Jeremiah, and Matthew, you heal the infirm, and you announce the future in the communion with the angels. We pray to you to intercede with Christ, God, to grant us the communion of the saints. They are also commemorated on September 28th and on the second Sunday of Great Lent. Hieromartyr Martyr Dionysius. Oh, this one's not as spicy. There was a longer version of his life that was pretty interesting. There's a lot going on in it. Yeah, Constantine did wait to be baptized. I think it was more common practice in the early church for people to wait to be baptized. Hello, Risto. Okay. What else? Oh, I guess I could drop the link in the chat. That'd be fun. In case you guys want to join. Let me grab a link. Copy link. Copy link. Here you go. If somebody wants to join in for a conversation, if not, that's okay. I'll just read more Lives of the Saints because I like to do that too. Hieromartyr Dionysius, Bishop of Alexandria. Let me move my screen so I can see if somebody wants to join or if somebody does join. I only have one monitor right now. I got to upgrade. Okay. St. Dionysius, the Bishop of Alexandria, was the son of wealthy pagan parents. He converted to Christianity at a mature age and became a pupil of Origen. Later, he was appointed as the head of Alexandria's catechetical school, and then became Bishop of Alexandria in the year 247. St. Dionysius devoted much effort to defend the church from heresy, and he encouraged his flock in the firm confession of orthodoxy during the persecution under the emperors Decius and Valerian. The holy bishop endured much suffering in his lifetime. When the Decian persecution broke out, St. Dionysius was forced to flee Alexandria, but returned when the emperor died. He was later exiled to Libya during the reign of Valerian. When he was able to resume his duties in Alexandria in 261, St. Dionysius had to contend with civil war, famine, plague, and other difficulties. The saint called upon his flock to tend sick Christians and pagans alike and to bury the dead. Concerning the death of his spiritual children, he wrote, in such a manner the best of our brethren have departed this life. This generation of the dead, a deed of great piety and firm faith, is no less of a martyrdom. St. Dionysius illumined his flock through his preaching and with the deeds of love and charity. An illness prevented him from attending the Council of Antioch in 264 to 265, and he fell asleep in the Lord while it was in session. The influence of St. Dionysius extended beyond the limits of his diocese, and his writings dealt with practical as well as theological subjects, on nature, on temptations, on the promises, etc. He was familiar with Greek philosophy. Only fragments of his writings survive today, most of them preserved in Eusebius, who mentions him in the church history and calls him Dionysius the Great. 2 complete letters of St. Dionysius are extant, one addressed to Novatian and the other to Basilides. So Dionysius is the Greek name, and the Latin version of that is Denis, and that happened to be my father's name. May God have mercy on his soul. Hey, Risto's here. Okay, great. Hold on just a second. Here we come. Let me stop sharing the screen and we will in you in. Hello, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Good to see you.
Like it's good to see you. Are you sitting like on your back porch with a beautiful night sky in your background?
No, it's a fake background. Here's what's really behind me.
Oh, a bookshelf. Yeah. If you're going to be in this little corner, you have to have a bookshelf. I don't have a bookshelf in this room. So, well, I do, but you can't see it on camera. Mine's just a little one. It's hiding like right over my shoulder right there.
Someone needs like just the tiniest bookshelf in the world, you know, that'd be great.
Yeah, I did. This one is just 3 shelves, but it's one of many bookshelves I have. To the chagrin of my wife, she's like, "Are you ever going to read these?" I'm like, "That's not the point of a library."
I can totally relate to that. I subscribed to this one YouTube channel, and it's a pretty good channel. They're former Jehovah's Witness, and they owned a Christian bookstore after they left the Jehovah's Witness church, and so he's got tons of books, and he would just go through. This couple would go through, and they'd read sections from these books. And I'd listen to these like 8-minute videos, and I'd be like, oh, I have to go buy that book. And after a while, I was like, I need to stop listening to their channel. This is a problem.
Yeah, it's like it's an ongoing advertisement. Yeah, no, I hear you. I do the same, and thankfully, I found a website online and called Z Library, and they have a lot of books on there. So I get, and you can download up to 10 a day. So I get quite a few there, and what I can't find there, then I'll buy on Amazon, because I do like having. And then there are certain books where I just want to have a physical book.
Yep.
So, and I'm actually moving more and more toward physical books. I don't like. I guess the electronic books are okay for what they're. I mean, at times, but it's like awkward to read, especially on your phone. Like if it's PDF, I hate PDFs on my phone. Can't stand it. So.
Yeah, I can relate. Yeah. I'm trying to start a math cult, and so there's this. I found this there's like this old reference, or this old book written by Proclus, I think in 400 AD. And there's more recent printings of it, like English translations. And I have archive.org has tons of stuff, tons of old books.
Yeah.
But I would love to have the hard copy just to have in my hand as I look through it. There's something different about that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and somebody made a really good point, and I hadn't thought of it before, but it's very true for me, is that my memory of reading also has a locational lookup. So if I'm remembering something, it's like, oh, it was on this top of this page, top of the right page. If I can just look through, oh yeah, there it is. And when you have PDF, that kind of gets lost. And people are like, oh, Control F, bro. And it's like, yeah, I know, but I don't always remember the word that I'm looking for. Sometimes it's like a concept or something. So
yeah. And I think some people's minds especially work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my wife and my daughter, one of my daughters, they're the same as you, where they could like go and open to a page, they remember like where it is on the page.
Yes. Yeah. And I really miss having that when I'm reading a digital book. It's kind of disorienting. It's like, it's hard for me to keep interested, honestly. So.
Well, I was excited to see that you were doing a live stream.
Oh, thanks.
We've texted a little bit, and then I think we first connected because you were a former Mormon, and I saw someone in the corner that was, and I developed an interest in Mormonism a few years back. So I was like, oh, that's cool that there's someone in the corner who used to be a Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still looking into it now, or are you Mormon now, or what?
No.
Okay.
I guess it depends on what you mean by looking into it.
Well, I mean, you're starting a math cult, I guess. That's
because I have the word cult in there.
Yeah. No,
I think that's unrelated.
Separate interest.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah. That's
I'm always kind of following what's going on with the Mormons. I have relatives who are still LDS. So,
yeah.
So I'm always loosely paying attention to what's going on over there.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of overlap with what happens in the Mormon world, just with what happens in the American world in general, or the religious world in general, or Christianity. I was kind of grown up to that Mormons were bad, keep them at arm's length. And now I think I've adopted a definitely a different posture than that. Even though I have no plans to become a Mormon.
Yeah.
I do and enjoy getting to know them and learning about where they're coming from.
Yeah. I can't say anything bad about the people who I know who are LDS. I work with a lot of them. I have family members who are LDS, and they're all very earnest and very good people. I work with people who are very pious, and and it's nice to not like, I live in Utah, and there's a lot of benefits to living here because you have people. I live in a religious culture, and there's a lot of, I mean, the bathrooms are clean here, and there's not much graffiti, and the streets are clean, and there's not much crime. It's still nice. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I went on so the new missionaries in our area, they tracked me down, as they as they do, and I went on a hike with two of them who I hadn't met before this week, and they said an interesting thing that I'd never heard before, because I inquired about how they conceived of the great apostasy and what happened to Christianity before the before the restoration that happened in Joseph Smith's time, because that's what 1800 years basically of there being no true church authority on the earth. I was like, that's a long time. And they said,
Right.
one of the guys said, I don't know if you've heard this before, but one of the guys said, well, God was waiting for or needed a free country. So I hadn't heard that element
That's
before.
new.
Yeah, that very. I mean, it's a very because Mormonism is like I've heard like the most American of religions. So
Yeah, for sure. Yes, it definitely is. Yeah, I would agree with that. But I had not heard that angle before. That's a new apologetic that I hadn't heard before. So,
but it isn't super far from, I grew up evangelical. So it's not super far from a lot of other kind of Christian groups in the United States where you go to church and you have the American flag and the Christian flag also. And the two things do tend to get intertwined quite a bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the Mormons believe that the Constitution is revealed, or at least inspired. Let's not say revealed. Let's say inspired by God, and that I don't know, like Republican democracy is like God's chosen form of government. So yeah, if they had the same idea of saints that like Orthodox or Catholics have, then the founding fathers would be saints in the Mormon church. I would say that.
Sure. And I think, even outside the Mormon church, I see elements of that in the world I grew up in. I mean, you see a lot of Donald Trump iconography these days, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and then the whole one of the nicknames for him from the old days of the Donald was the God Emperor Donald, the God Emperor Trump, right? So it's like, yeah, definitely. He's been, yeah, it was kind of like said in jest. It was like a joke that because, like he was going to end democracy and basically take it into being an empire, a la Julius Caesar. But I think it was a half joke that was meant mainly to like freak people out and irritate people, like, oh no, he's gonna end the country, it's like, but anyway.
So is this the first stream on your channel then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's cool to see you starting that. What do you hope to do with your channel? I've often thought about like, well, what if I ever did a channel? I think this little corner is interesting. And it's always interesting to see people's different kind of angle that they come in. So what are your plans?
Well, I got a couple of things going on. One, I have an analysis of Ad Astra that I've been doing for a while that I need to finish. So this way I have to finish it. So, because that movie is really interesting. I think it's just chock full of symbolism, and the coloring and everything, the framing. It's just, and then the story itself, all of that stuff is tied together. And so I've been working on that. Also, I've had a pet project for a while in the background, and now it's the need for it and the interest is actually growing. And it's this idea, like, so I'm a collector of dictionaries, and which is kind of ironic because it's definitely an Enlightenment project, like Samuel Johnson was all about the Enlightenment, and that was part of it, was trying to capture it. But I do find it really interesting to see how language has evolved over years. And what I really want to do is like look at how words are being used or being defined in a modern dictionary and compare that to older dictionaries, and to look at how things have changed over time, and so I have a series of videos on that I want to do. And then, but in the meantime, I also there's a few people that I met at Northwestuary that I really wanted to have deeper conversations with, because at Northwestuary, it's kind of like being a Labrador retriever at a tennis ball factory, where there's a lot going on, and you always feel like, okay, this conversation's good, and I'm really trying to be present here, but I also there's that person that I really want to talk to, so it's like there just wasn't enough time to have all the conversations I wanted to have there. And there's some really interesting people that I actually met there that I hadn't talked to before, that I also want to be able to talk with. So I wanted to kind of have a space for that, to be able to start setting up those conversations. And then I also just love the live stream. It reminds me of the Art Bell show. I used to listen to that when I was a teenager. I don't know if you know Art Bell.
Yeah.
But so I was really into Art Bell, and the best was the wild card line. Wild card line. I got east of the Rockies, call this number. West of the Rockies, call that number. And then, then the wild card line. And the wild card line was always like some schizo guy, like sharing really funny or crazy, interesting stuff about underground bases or whatever. And so I kind of like that dynamic of just not knowing who you're going to talk to and just trying to make an interesting conversation. So
yeah.
Anyway,
I'd seen. I think Paul had on his channel. I'm trying to remember his name. Was it Graham?
Yeah.
Huh?
Graham Pardoon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so then I listened to. I think I listened to his talk, but then I went back and listened to his interview with Christian Baxter.
Mm.
And I was like, ooh, just like it's sometimes nice to hear from other people, like what's going on, and and you can like connect with certain bits of that. So I definitely did with Graham, where I was like, oh, I'd love to just sit down and have a beer with that guy, and he'd be an interesting guy to kind of hang out with or walk with for a while. I can relate to where he's going in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I actually did have a brief conversation with Graham, and it was a real joy. He's lived a pretty like in the wilderness a lot, let's put it that way. He's out there living and writing poetry about being at the edge of civilization, and I really like that. I kind of grew up around that ethos. I kind of come from a long line of let's just say interesting characters. So I like that. I like those kind of people. I don't do well in the button down kind of predictable routine world of corporate America. I mean, I do it for a living, but I like having interesting friends.
Yeah. You'd mentioned language stuff. That would be super interesting to hear. You could even do quite a few like little short videos. I mean, etymology is almost always and to track the development of a word and the change of a word over time. That's always super interesting. I don't know if you've ever read, but I think you would appreciate. There's a book called Poetic Diction by Owen Barfield.
I don't think I have. I have not read that one. I've only read Saving the Appearances.
Did he? And I haven't read that. Is that a book of his?
Yeah, by Owen Barfield. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I found out about that book because I read somewhere that Lewis and Tolkien both said that was one of the most influential, one of the biggest influences on their writing. And I like both of them as writers. So I was like, well, I should check that out.
Yeah.
So I think I picked up a copy when I was in my 20s and made it a few pages in. And I was like, nope, this is way too much for me.
Yeah.
but a couple years ago, I made my way through actually with our kids, and I still didn't understand a huge chunk of it because I think it assumes an education level that's way beyond mine.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
I can't read Latin, Greek, and French, you know, and
Right.
I don't know all these people, but we went through slow enough that I was able to understand the ideas in the book for the most part.
Mm,
And it really does it does kind of talk about how language has changed over time and how metaphor plays into that, um, and how our modern language relates to the very early languages
mm.
poetically and metaphorically. It's really good.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. That's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really into that.
So you could even do like readings on that. But
Mm.
like I say, it's really dense. I had to go really slow to be able to get it.
Well, that's how I was with Saving the Appearances. It's because it's like pulling you, it's challenging you to go into a different mind space, into a very different kind of like almost orthogonal worldview, to start looking at modernity while you're in modernity, right? And it's really good though, because it helped me to, it broke out of it helped. It was one of the things that, I mean, it was a later development, but it definitely helped me snap free of the materialism worldview that I'd had for so long. Yeah, so it was good. It was really good.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to see what's underneath like what you believe and think.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Do I've noticed that for a lot of people, like their presuppositions, they just don't, they can't even see them. They're just like, well, it's obvious. And you're like, is it? I don't know. Like if you ask them, if you question one of their assumptions, they're like, well, of course that's true. And you're like, well, wait, what? They want to, like, they just like take all of these things as given and then say, well, with all these givens, this. And you're like, okay, well, let's talk about the givens. Then they're like, why? They're givens. And you're like, oh man, it's hard to point people at it.
yeah, well, and tying things back around to the math cult,
Mm,
uh, because givens are. So I've been starting to study Euclid's Elements,
okay.
um, which is like a very foundational geometrical mathematical text.
Did you
That,
know that Lincoln had it memorized?
yeah, yeah,
That's wild to me. Yeah, you could show him you could show him a figure, and he could give you the proof. He studied it for like he went in the forest and studied it for 3 years, and he wanted to be able to. He wanted to know it so well because he felt that it was foundational to be a good attorney, in order to be able to argue with logical proofs, the logical proofs of Euclid. It's like a
yeah.
training for his logical thinking. Anyway, sorry to
Well,
interrupt. I
and
just
it
thought that was really
totally
neat.
is. As I've kind of delved into it or dived into it, would just thought it would have been about geometry and proofs, but it's so much deeper. Like I think it's the second most printed book after the Bible. Um,
Wow.
and and like I'll give you just a couple examples. I could probably I talk
I
about
love
this
this. No, this is great. No, this is great.
way too long, but anyways, you were talking about um, presuppositions.
Mm,
Like Euclid starts with that. He starts with a list of definitions and things we're gonna assume and not prove. And in some sense, I think we all have those presuppositions, whether we see them or not, and we have to have them. We need them because if you don't have some, you're not going to be able to do anything. Your math is going to be the most boring math in the
mm,
whole world. Your belief system isn't going to be able to do enough work. But that being said, you don't want to have too many. There's a problem of having too many that you haven't really considered. Euclid's presuppositions were considered, and then ever since he's written them, mathematicians throughout the years have tried to poke holes or say, this doesn't. I don't think this should be a presupposition. I think we need to prove this one.
mm.
but I mean, his have held up remarkably well.
Yeah.
But digging into Euclid, you can find all kinds of wild stuff. There was a dude, just one thing. Sorry. And
No,
then
I
I'll
love this. This is great. This is right up my alley because, like,
okay.
chaos theory. Like, I accidentally found chaos theory on my own studying a steel fabrication company and the output of it and trying to make predictions about it. And that's actually what started breaking me out of my materialist worldview. But anyway,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah. So this is right up my alley. No, don't worry.
Well, maybe you could join the math cult, but
we'll get to that.
but so here's just one little nugget. You already mentioned Lincoln, which is fascinating. A guy wrote a book about it. So there's a
You
ton
wrote a
about
book about it?
some guy.
Oh,
I can't remember
okay.
his name. Some guy wrote a book.
Yeah, okay.
I stumbled upon this past week a textbook that a guy wrote. I think his name is Charles Dodson or Dodgson. I can't remember. I can't totally remember his name, but he wrote a textbook in 1883 on. It's just like a geometry textbook, and then in 1885, a couple years later, he wrote a book about Euclid. It's called Euclid and His Modern Rivals, I think. But it's about Euclid, but it's in the form of a play. And I was like, that is wild. And this guy who wrote it, obviously loved math, but he had a pen name and he did other writings. And his pen name is Lewis Carroll.
Wow. Yeah. The rabbit hole goes deep.
It does. I don't know. I'm not sure how deep, but it's pretty wild.
No. Well, as far as I know, the Euclid rabbit hole goes pretty deep. And doesn't he tie to the Pythagoreans as well?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if they were before him. They had a full blown math cult, not the kind that I would be interested in. But, yeah.
Well,
So
can you have a cult without, like? I mean, I guess I should ask you, what is the kind of cult that you would not be interested in? What are the trappings of the cult that you don't want to recapitulate?
Well, nothing that would take itself too seriously.
I see.
I'm more using it tongue in cheek, kind of like actually in the Inklings kind of way.
I see.
Oh, just a weird group of people that kind of
who like math.
that feed into that.
I see. Well, what's your? Do you study math or do you work? Do you use math for work, or what's your? No, just an interest of yours.
No, yeah, just an interest. I used to work in IT, although I didn't use a lot of math for that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I minored in math in college just because I liked it. And then we homeschool, so that's I'm going over Euclid with our kids.
Cool.
And I really enjoy math, and especially since we've been homeschooling, I kind of discovered that, like, I understood the procedure of math, but I didn't understand the why behind it. So it's been kind of a process of just starting to begin to learn to understand what in the world math even is. So, like, for instance, I'll ask people, if I'm going to give you a math problem, now you give me the word problem, give me a word problem example of it. And I'll give you a really simple one that most probably like third graders would understand the math problem. But I ask adults who understand math and they still struggle with this one. It's, give me a word problem for 1/2 divided by 2/3.
Okay. Well, you've got half a pizza left over. You've got half a pizza left over because last night you had a party. It's a slumber party. And there's 3 people. Well, let's see. Ooh, that's good. Divided by 2/3. No, you're right. That's a good question.
So what I first did is I would say there's half a pizza and you have 2/3 of half the pizza, but that's times 2/3. So like what I ran
Yeah.
into was I didn't even understand like super basic stuff, like a word problem for 2 minus -6. Like I was like, I don't even know what that is.
Oh, right.
I
Yeah.
know how to do the procedures, but I don't understand what's going on.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's kind of an accounting. That reminds me of that old accounting puzzle. Yeah, that pizza one's good though. The half divided by the half divided by 2/3, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah, because you cross multiply and divide. See, I would almost like have to know the answer to be able to back my way into a word problem for it.
Well,
That's
that's something
interesting.
you can chew on. It took me.
I will. That's really fun.
I think I chewed on it for a week. Eventually, I came up with something,
Yeah, no, that's really fun. I like that a lot.
but I'd like to hear about your if you're game. I'd like to hear about the chaos theory. What happened
Oh,
with
yeah,
that?
sure. So I was a project manager at a pipe fabrication company, and this company basically builds pipe spools where you're taking a certain length of pipe and cutting it to length and then welding certain fittings onto it, right? For custom kind of configurations for like a gas plant, like a natural gas plant, or for a power plant. So, they just give us the drawings of the finished things and we break it up into pieces that we can build that are shippable and that are manageable, and we build those and send them to them, and then they put them together in the field. So basically the idea behind it is that the shop welds are cheaper than field welds, right? So because the conditions in a shop are ideal, so they're trying to do as much in the shop as possible. Okay, so all that being said, I was a project manager and there were two questions that came up in every customer phone call or in phone calls with management. So how many are we going to ship next week? And when is this particular one going to ship? And I was like, okay. So I was being trained by a guy who had 40 years of experience as a project manager. And I went to him and said, when is this one going to ship? He's like, no idea. I'm like, he's like, I don't know, like anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks. And I was like, can you get any more specific than that? He's like, no. I was like, okay. And I said, well, when is this one going to ship? Or no, and I said, how many are we going to ship next week? And he was like, between 5 and 100. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, it'll be somewhere between there. I was like, well, they're not going to like that. And he was like, okay, tell them between 20 and 60. And I was like, that sounds, or what are you talking about? Like, how could you not know? And he's like, you can't know. And I was like, okay. So I took that personally. I took it as a personal challenge to be able to answer those two questions. And I don't like, just so you know, my background, like I dropped out of college because of ADD. Like I just can't do college. So I'm just an autodidact, but I'm insatiably curious to the point of it being a passion that I confess. It's so, anyway, I went down the rabbit hole of trying to answer that question. And I did have a background in probability because I had spent some time in the poker world. So I knew about probability. So about like, and well, I won't ruin the ending, but I started on the probability and then I started going down calculus and I started going down Bayes theorem. Bayes theorem was just kind of coming into the public consciousness at that time because of, was the guy who built 538, Nate Silver. He made it popular. So I started studying Bayes theorem. I was trying to use that to make these predictions. And there was just what I encountered there was so many variables. So I started learning how to do statistical inference on my data set. Because here's the beautiful thing. I had 10 years of really good data from 7 different fab shops that I had access to. So I had a huge data set, right? Like it was amazing. And it had a status of like every time that it moved to a different status. So it was down to the day, but that's as deep of a granularity as you need in this business. So I kept trying to analyze it, and I started working with started reaching out to like math professors, and and no one really knew how to no one's really doing work in job shop scheduling right now. I think there's one Indian guy who's like developed a proprietary genetic algorithm and some software using that to do it. But like it kind of died in the 70s. Like people just stopped being interested in it. There's just, for whatever reason, there wasn't a lot of money in it. And so the research has only been kind of like very basically iterative since the 70s. So there's really not a lot of original work being done. So I was trying to do that and with no credentials. And then stumbled my way into Monte Carlo simulation. And I started using a Monte Carlo simulation to actually build a model off of our data to be able to make predictions. But in the meantime, what I learned is that, and this was the interesting thing, and this is where things started opening up to me, is like, if you look at the output of, and I learned about this from Robert Sapolsky. He did lectures. He's a professor. He's a biology professor at Stanford, and he stumbled into chaos theory too, accidentally. And he was explaining how it's basically, it doesn't have a scale. Well, what does that mean? You know, like if you chart the output of something, the variance doesn't have it doesn't matter what scale you look at, the variance, the magnitude of the variance is the same. And what that means is, like, if I looked at the output of one welder and it looks like a little, wave, and if I look at the output of 10 welders, it looked like a wave, and it was the same shape of wave. And if I just took all the numbers off of it, you couldn't tell which was which. And if I looked at the whole shop, it's the same wave. So there's a variance there, and the variance is within a range, and the range is predictable. But the scale, so like if I look at the output of a whole shop, it's obviously going to be like, we're going to put out like 10,000 inches a day. And if I look at 10 welders, it's going to be 1,000 inches a day. And if I look at one welder, it's going to be 100 inches a day. But the difference of the amount of variance, if you measure it proportionately, is the same, no matter what scale you look at. And that's one of the signs of a chaotic system. So it fit that. And then I started looking into, it's also very sensitive to minor perturbations, lead to very different outcomes. So what the other interesting thing that happened is, I had already built my Monte Carlo simulation model of predicting how long a certain spool would take to get from this status to this status. And it was good. And it was all based on probability. But the problem was, it gave you too wide. Basically, I ended up going back to the guy after 3 years of personal study. I went back to the guy who trained me and said, it turns out you're right. and the numbers you gave me are about the 80 percentile certainty, right? So with 80% certainty, you can give that range that he gave, which means that still 20% of the time you're going to be wrong. And so that's why he was just hesitant to actually give him any number, because 20% of the time being wrong is not great for customer relations. But that's the nature of our business. And the reason is because there's too many compounding variables that can affect when something's going to be done. Well, there's many reasons. The second reason is because we would batch everything a certain way for production. So it was always according to material and size of the pipe. So stainless steel, 6-inch, all gets batched together. Well, once it goes to paint, which even nowadays most stainless does, for certain coatings, because contrary to popular belief, stainless can rust. Once it goes to paint, they batch things completely differently, because they're batching it by paint group, because they're trying to minimize the number of paint batches. So that breaks your predictions, right? It just breaks everything. But then on top of that, instead of having, so in a manufacturing environment, the basis of that system is a machine, and the machine is predictable down to the 10th of an inch, or down to the 10th of a second sometimes, right? At the basis of a custom fabrication shop is a person. And that has two big problems for predictability. One is, if you had a fight with your wife last night, which I can't predict, then you're only going to be half as effective today as you were yesterday. The other problem is, there's literally, and this blows everyone's minds, and I have so much evidence of this, and no one believes me. There was literally a 10 times difference in productivity between my top welder and my bottom welder. Literally 10x, right? And it was always the same two people. Same guy at the top, same guy at the bottom. And if you get rid of the one at the bottom, another one takes his place. And it's 10x. And now if I'm trying to predict who's going to do it, I can't predict which guy's going to pick it up. Right? And you scale that over, between 10 and 15 steps to get out the door. Forget about it. You're not predicting it.
So it sounds like maybe I could summarize it. It sounds like the amount of variables and the variability in those variables just creates it like a gaseous system that just expands to a certain size, and you can't really it's not like you're going to compress that. It's just going to fill that space.
Correct. Yeah. Well, and this was the other thing that came out of the analysis was that, so they were spending all this money trying to make fabrication faster, right? Because everyone just assumes, pipe fabrication, most of the work is building it. No. So on average, it would take us like 110 days to build something. Of that, fabrication was 3 days. 60 to 70, like 65 of those days were redrawing the drawings and doing the material takeoffs and ordering the material and getting the material there.
Yeah.
It was 3 days for fabrication. It was about 7 days for NDE. And then the rest was paint.
So how did that, you mentioned that started to break you out of a materialist viewpoint. How did that do that?
Well, so what blew my mind was that a chaotic system is deterministic, but it is not predictable. So this actually, this ties into eventually one of the things that made the most sense to me about Orthodox theology is that they believe that God's knowledge is contingent on our agency. So God only knows real things. So God doesn't work in hypotheticals. God does not have, God is working with us. He's always calling us to repentance, but he's not punishing us for things we haven't done yet. Not only but that goes down to the person, but also scales up to the culture or to the world, right? He's not punishing us for things we haven't done because his knowledge is limited to what is real, which means things that have happened. And he's always responding to that. And so God himself is free. And because of that, but what that means is that the early Greek church fathers taught that the reason why no one except the Father knows when the Son will come again is because God is waiting to the last possible moment for as many people as possible to repent. And only he knows when that is. Because it's a relationship with us. And anyway,
was that pretty early on in your journey then? Was that like one of the first cracks in your foundation?
Yeah, well, one of the first cracks, definitely with the chaos theory, because it was like, this means it's not predictable, right? So it kills Laplace's demon, in my opinion. So Laplace's demon is the proposition that if we knew the location and velocity of every particle in the known universe, we could then unwind or wind it forward and know what happened in the past and what happened in the future. And I don't believe that's true. And it's because of my chaos theory understanding. And I'm just a layman. I'm just retarded. But as far as I could understand it, that's not true. Because it's not even true for God. He knows that all right now, but he doesn't know what it's going to be. He knows the patterns, but he doesn't know the details, and he's waiting until those patterns play out before it culminates, right? That's my understanding anyway. So
yeah, I think so. It kind of sounds like a little bit like the universe became wilder and more unpredictable as you as you discover that in your small system and in chaos theory in general. And once that starts to open up, then it's maybe the simplistic way that I was understanding the universe isn't going to fit with how the universe is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. It started opening up possibilities that maybe it was, I think it was the reductionism that got broken by it, right? Like reductionism does not work in a chaotic environment, which is why it drives scientists crazy and why they don't really talk about it. I mean, some scientists do, and obviously there are people who are involved in chaos theory and complexity and complex systems, because chaos theory is kind of between complexity and reductionism. It's like it lives between, and then you go up into a complex system with feedback loops and everything. And obviously there are scientists who are interested in that, but it's very inconvenient for the reductionist worldview. And so anyway,
Right.
And it was definitely inconvenient for mine.
Yeah. And there's kind of like a fundamentalism that exists in religion, but then I also see it outside of the religious world in the naturalistic atheist worldview of a very simplistic way of understanding the universe and thinking that you understand more than you know. Like it would be a good conversation with someone if they're like, science has the answers, which I see that a lot. Science will tell us what we need to know. Science is our magisterium.
Yeah.
And then just to ask them, I'll say, okay, I will grant you that if you can tell me what 1/2 divided by 2/3 means right now. If not, if you have to go search that one out, maybe we're gonna listen to science, but maybe it won't be our magisterium.
Yeah. Well, this comes back to the presuppositions part too, where if you ask them, why is empiricism the best way of determining what's true or what's real? What's the empirical evidence for that? Right? Like it becomes, you can get them stuck in recursion, where you're trying to break out of that and say, how did you come to the conclusion that empiricism is the best way of establishing what's true? Right? Like what's the evidence that you use to justify that empiricism is the best way to establish what's true or what's real? And that then you get into the goalpost moving conversations, and the cognitive dissonance comes on, and then you're not having a conversation anymore.
Right. Well, I think it was T Grog in the comments today on Paul's video. I asked him what his thoughts were. I enjoy chatting with him. I asked him what his thoughts were on philosophy, because I see a lot of times in the skeptical world that they tend not to like philosophy. I think they feel like it's a Trojan horse to get things in that shouldn't be allowed, to get in some axioms or presuppositions that they're smuggling something in, that squirrely philosophy. So he said it was helpful. His answer was, if I'm remembering right, it was helpful to kind of sort out language and ideas maybe a bit, or language, but basically science will tell us what we need to know. And I just responded, I just said, well, science being basically what tells us what we need to know, that is a philosophical statement.
I remember that from the comments. Yeah, I remember that. And I thought that was insightful. Yeah, you're right, because philosophy is the structure in which science hangs. Right? Without philosophy, you can't do science, because you need some way of organizing the hierarchy of value, right? And that's what philosophy, and then ultimately religion is, in my opinion, right? Like religion is your structure for what's more important than what, and what's more true than what, and science ignores how to it it doesn't have the tools. So this is the example I always use. Science can tell you which knife is the sharpest and what the material properties are of the blades and of the steel and the tempering process of the steel and the forging of the steel and the shape of the knife and the bevel and the angle of which you cut it, but it cannot tell you which knife is the best knife. It can't. And so because you have to say, I want to cut cold cheddar cheese, then science will say, oh, this is what you want to use. You have to provide the purpose. You have to provide the telos before science has anything useful to say.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, go ahead.
Well, or I want to stab my neighbor. What's science going to say? Science will tell me the best knife for that.
Yes, but it has nothing to say about whether you should stab your neighbor, right? The other example is, yes, you can use science to build a rocket, but science won't tell you if you should put an astronaut in the end of it and send it to the moon, or put a warhead in it and send it to a neighboring country. Like, science doesn't. No, it doesn't. And they're like, "Let's just be rational." I'm like, well, I can rationalize anything. I can rationalize sending a nuclear bomb, and I can rationalize going to the moon.
Well, and good luck. Good luck. You're basically chaos theorying your ethics, because there's so many variables.
Yes.
Your ethical. It's going to be really difficult to make an informed ethical framework with that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, because it becomes trolley problems. Right. And trolley problems are useless. Like, to me, it's always hypotheticals are just a waste of time.
Well, and in society, again, back to the chaos theory, society is so complex. If you're going to, let's say you propose a morality where you're like, in our society, we don't allow people to drink alcohol. It's like, how do you understand the effects either way of that? How do you, it's so complicated. You might have an idea of how you're going to do that. But when people talk about the common thing is harm, that's we're going to talk about the harm that it does. It's like, how do you understand the harm that this action or the lack of this action does? And we see it in our society as we're kind of crumbling apart, and the next generation, just a new app, a new social media app can cause crazy amount of harm that we don't anticipate. We're not good. If it's us looking at what harm, or if it's us kind of speculating on what harm a thing causes, our track record's not good for that.
Yeah, well, especially when you get the second order effects, right? Like the unpredictable byproducts of your decisions and of your policies. We're terrible at that. And we're not very good at fixing it once the cat's out of the bag either, right? I mean, I think the prohibition is probably the last example of one where we were as a culture, oh, whoa, that was a mistake. Right? That did not go the way we planned it. And they actually were able to pass a constitutional amendment undoing it. I mean, I don't think that's ever going to happen again. I don't think we'll ever have that kind of unified. I mean, I pray that we do, but I don't think we'll ever have that kind of unified agreement on that was stupid. We shouldn't have done that, because we've become too fractured and too there's just not as much unifying principle as there used to be. I think we've lost kind of the unifying monoculture of our country.
Yeah. Well, and course correction in that case gave you a glass of wine and beer. So maybe that's easier to course correct in that case.
True. Yeah. A lot of people, understood, had a much stronger understanding of how how that's actually useful for a culture. There's a medicinal aspect to alcohol. Yes, it has problems. Yes, so there's side effects. Yes, especially with drunk driving and everything. I get that, right? And then alcoholics, and I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying, but it seems like the benefits outweigh the cost, which is also a very difficult conversation to have in our current political culture. Everyone's like very anxious, and so they're in very much black and white thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you grew up in a church where alcohol wasn't allowed, and I also grew up in a church where alcohol wasn't allowed. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Although a lot of people in my family drank a lot of alcohol. So, because not everybody in my family were LDS, right? Especially, I'm talking about like extended family,
sure. Yeah.
But yeah. And so I got to see both sides. I got to see the teetotalers, and I got to see those who, it could be a bit of an issue, so yeah, I think the wisdom is there in the middle, where you drink a drink or two once or twice a week maybe, and that seems to be my sweet spot.
Right. Yeah. If you can, I mean, there's some video games I can't play. It's too addictive.
Yeah, factorials like that for me.
So.
Yeah, I get it, but alcohol doesn't seem to, for me, it's not a beast that I have to wrestle with. It's not difficult.
Yeah, same for me. I think perhaps it helped growing up without alcohol and tobacco. Either that, or I'm just wired in such a way that wasn't really going to be an issue for me.
Yeah.
But I definitely have my areas, whether it's online things or obsessions or food. I definitely can get or am hooked in those. So
yeah, same. So how did you okay, I know you're jokingly saying you want to start a math cult, but like, tell me about your discovery of math, or how you took, I mean, you had a minor in math in university, but you kept with it, like you've kept studying it. And what is it now that really draws you to math?
well, I mean, it's not just math. I think it even I think it even is like related to faith. The older I get, the more, I came up through the American education system, which is, we're going to teach you the facts, but not much of the understanding. So the older I get, the more like with faith, I want to understand my faith and where other people are coming from, and the same goes with math, and especially teaching our kids. Like, as I'm telling them these things, I want to also understand them. And I realized that I excelled at math. I did great at math in school, and I was always interested in that subject, but I really had almost no understanding of it. So like I got the highest grade on the AP exam for calculus, but I didn't really even understand what calculus was or how you might use it. So again, like in life in general, as I've gotten older, I more want to understand what a thing is. And so I already liked math, but now the unfolding of it and the understanding of it, like I just find like tons of enjoyment in that.
Yeah.
And I still don't really understand much of it, but the Euclidean stuff, I think, like our education system, I think, kind of makes algebra as like the foundation of math. I think we tend to think in algebraic ways when you see a TV show and some like super smart person is, they're in front of a board with tons of variables, right?
Yeah.
But actually, I think geometry is perhaps more the foundation of math and algebra.
Man, I have a whole thing about that. That ties into zero for me. So zero is like I think zero is very similar. It's very deconstructing. I think zero is like a solvent that you have to be really careful with. And I think zero is one of them. So between the printing press and zero, I think those have equal weight in causing the Protestant Reformation, to be honest with you. The introduction of zero to Western culture. And it came from first Hinduism through the Muslims. And that's where your algebra that you're talking about is coming from too, right? So up to Newton and Laplace, before that, it was geometry, right? Like that was the basis of culture, just like you're talking about. And the whole reason there was a theological reason why zero was not a thing, and it was because God fills all things. So there cannot be a place, there is no place that is nothing. There is no, like, nothing does not have ontological reality in a geometric worldview. And in especially a religious geometric worldview, right? There's no room for nothing because God is in all things. So there's nowhere you can go where God isn't. And so that culture resisted the whole concept of zero. But ironically, what happened was Newton developed calculus in order to predict the orbits better. And the whole intent was to better predict the equinoxes so that they could better predict when to celebrate Easter. So the irony was that he was trying to make the calendar more accurate so that Easter would be more accurate, and developed calculus as a result. And the only reason he could is because of the concept of zero being introduced. And I don't think it's Laplace. I think it's Leibniz. Leibniz and Newton were the ones who they used zero to be able to develop calculus. But it's so because of that, that's what they used to then say, oh, these tools that we have are more true than that geometry stuff you guys have been using. And it actually, that's what also led to the Copernican revolution with the heliocentrism and versus the geocentrism. Like that all started to be unwound by zero. But because of my background in building things, I have a very geometric understanding of numbers because I use them for counting things, right? So there is no, that's why I use one-based indexes and not zero-based indexes, right? In IT. So, and that's a debate, and I just don't see any other way to do it. And all the mathematics guys go, oh, and I'm like, yeah, nice. Okay, I'm going to stick with the one-based because I'm counting things. The first thing you count is one. And so anyway, that extends into that. So then, so it is the worldview, and this is my belief, is that the whole managerial class is based around the algebra worldview, where things are just and this comes down to accounting too. So the difference between geometry, like an engineer and an accountant, is that an engineer, the numbers have a relationship to a physical object and they're used to measure it, and it's basically embedded in the real physical thing, right? Like a number is kind of a property or an identity that's embedded in a physical thing that you're measuring. For an accountant, the numbers only need to balance on each side of the equation because it's ultimately algebraic. And as a result, it has a much looser grasp or connection to physical reality, which is why you have all these accounting shenanigans that they play. And there's also the various states of the real numbers, right? Like I can look at it from a project management point of view. How much of my budget have I spent? Well, I've ordered something, but it hasn't been delivered yet. So I know how much it's going to be charge me, but when it gets delivered, it's too short. Like they sent me two fewer than I ordered, and they're only invoiced me for that. And so are you counting how much of my budget have I spent, or how much of my budget have you invoiced? And how much of my invoices have I paid? So I've got 3 different levels of real cost to my project, right? That's very different than how many feet of pipe have I cut? Right. And this is, I think, underlying the reason why if a company gets a CEO, most companies are started by engineers and killed by accountants. If you get a CEO as an accountant as your CEO, days are numbered.
Well, it's you know, it's kind of, you can have a long conversation about the concept of abstraction, you know,
Yep.
and then you have level upon level of abstraction, and even
Yep.
related to language, you know, so that it basically is our math system. We are taught in the world of abstraction, especially once we get past second or third grade, you know,
Yes.
it just moves to that abstract level, and you lose the story. And our society is so abstract as well. Everything, how we live is abstracted from, you know, like our food is abstracted from where it grows, our, you know, like everything is just so many levels removed. And linguistically, and this is kind of what Barfield says, is that happened with our language as well. Our language is founded on metaphor. I don't think we can really understand anything outside of metaphor. And but the further along we go, we lost the tune, we lost the metaphor. Now we don't, you know, unless you go back and look at the etymology, you don't understand where those things came from. Like I'm constantly discovering, oh, I've said this word my whole life and I never even thought about what it meant. And now I just pay attention for a little bit and I see, oh, this is what it, you know, where it came from.
Yeah. No, I think that's insightful. I agree with you that, you know, it's that whole idea of reasoning, like A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. Like that's an abstraction that we just assume is real and true, but that's really recent in human thinking, like being widespread, you know, like being a widespread understanding. Like most people don't think that way in most of history.
Yep.
And that blows people's minds when you start sharing that.
Yeah, there's it'd be interesting to hear your take on this. There was a very influential commentary written on Euclid's Elements by a Greek dude. I think he was pagan, even though the empire was Christian, but written in the 400s, a guy named Proclus. And he like expounds on this real simple stuff that Euclid wrote. So he'll like write like 10 pages on the definition of a point, you know, that which is without, I can't remember what the definition is, that which is without breadth and width or something. But then like he's interested philosophically in math, and you know, they expected as they learned math to learn about higher truths and about the universe. But one thing he said, we were just reading this week, he said, and this is related to I can't even remember what he's saying this on, but he says, for existence involves three factors: being, sameness, and otherness. And I thought that's like, to find this in this commentary on geometry, like the being, the way I take it is like the being is like things exist, you know, they are, even if I don't understand this. But then the sameness and otherness is like how we understand the world through metaphor, you know, it's like this, it's not like this other. So I just to find that in Proclus's work, I was like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, the other thing that came to mind too when you were talking about like the meaning behind words that we just take for granted, and this is, I think it is providential that the New Testament was written in Greek. And one thing that was pointed out to me that I think is really, I mean, it's infinitely fascinating to me, was how, you know, so like the heavenly is is associated with masculinity, and the earthly is associated with femininity, and it was, like the heavenly idea, and it was like concepts or ideas or patterns, and then you have the ground, you have potential, you have the earth, right? And someone pointed out in Greek, they're like, you have this in English too. The name for father, pattern, paternal, is heavenly, paternal, and the motherly is matter, maternal, right? And so you have patter and matter. So pattern from the heavenly, and then you have maternal, the matter, that the pattern, so the pattern is imposed on matter and brings order to it, right? And I was like,
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never. So you looked into the etymology of that?
yeah, patter and matter, yeah. And I mean, it comes from, and that's what we use for paternal and maternal, the father and the mother,
Right.
and it's all related. So
yeah, I think I think you would enjoy I mean, I think lots of people in the corner would enjoy, if they haven't already read it, Poetic Diction.
Yeah, I'll
It it
definitely look at that.
it kind of, it made me understand language better, but then it also kind of helped me kind of unlock poetry, which I don't think I had a good grasp on before that. That in combination with um, reading one of Pablo Neruda's odes, an ode to a lemon. So, have you read any of Pablo Neruda's poetry?
Nope, I'm writing this stuff down.
So I was a Spanish major. That's the only reason I've read his poetry. I haven't read tons of poetry, but he wrote a series in Spanish, but there's English translation of odes, and they're really good. But he has this one that's about like an ode to a lemon. I'm trying to remember which line it was. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see. Ode to a lemon. So I'll read just like one little section of it here. He says, knives sliced a small cathedral. In the lemon, the concealed apse opened, revealed acid-stained glass. Drops oozed topaz, altars, cool architecture. So like he compares, like, he's opening up this lemon and comparing it to this cathedral, and it kind of sounds like fancy language, but in just seeing all of his odes, he does one to like an ode to a tuna in the market. And I think what he's describing in that lemon, as you've cut it open and you've revealed a cathedral, he's seeing a cathedral in it, in the shape and everything. I think he's getting at what a lemon truly is and what we miss. We miss so much of like what's going on in life around us. He's not just using flowery language or coming up with these creative metaphors. He's paying attention and seeing what is really there, the beauty, the artwork, the wonder that's just kind of like all around us. And so then that made me like, that kind of like made me look at poetry like all different. Now, certainly there is like really flowery, oh, look at me, how creative I am kind of poetry, which I probably don't love that so much. But a poetry that helps you see something in life that existed there before, but you had missed it, and to understand what's going on, that's again looking at the etymology, that's looking at the original metaphor, that's poetic diction.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. What was I going to say? Before I forget, and that was really beautiful, and it actually reminds me of an image I always use of learning to see arrowheads. With my grandmother, we'd go hunting arrowheads, and I couldn't find any, and she always found them. And then finally one day she like taught me how to see them. We were walking together and she just like pointed, like, you see it? I was like, no. And then she's like slowly moving her finger down closer to it. And then all of a sudden, and then she like reaches down and pulls it and like pulls it up and be like, see? And I was like, oh. And she did that again. And then after that, and then that day I found my first arrowhead. Because I had been looking, but I didn't know how to see. And she, by pointing, revealed something I couldn't see before. So I think that it's exactly what you're talking about with the poetry, right?
Yep.
So he's pointing at the connection that a lemon has to a deeper reality that we just gloss over. But because he's pointing at it, now you start to see it. It makes total sense. But the other thing I was going to share with you was the book that I think you would really like, and it really helped me get a much better grasp on like theology and on what these words and like just the worldview of like the ancient Greeks. And it's called, it's by St. John of Damascus, he also wrote the Ladder of Divine Ascent. But he has a book. I'll just share this screen. Hold on. Because other people might be interested in it too. 1 second. Man, I'm a streaming noob. Let's see. Okay, present. Share screen. I'll pull this up. Okay. So, and I have to put it on the screen. There. Oh, yeah, I did. It came up. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Writings, the Fount of Knowledge. It's the philosophical chapters. So he goes in there and he's just like, what is being? What is truth? What is beauty? What is goodness? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to, what is heaven? What is earth? Like, it's just like, I wish I would have known about this way earlier in my journey, because it took me so long to try to get I just kind of piecemealed together a basic understanding of these common philosophical concepts from Plato and from Aristotle. And St. John of Damascus really puts them together concisely, and it's really great. So I think you would really like that. Yeah,
definitely.
I gave my copy to Matthew Parlato, so now I need to get another one.
There's it's interesting in the LDS world, both actively practicing and former LDS. Like I've run across people who I think they would appreciate that as well. There's some who like I think they would even enjoy interacting with and being part of the corner.
I hope so. I think there's oh man, it would be interesting because it depends on how they came in, right? Like if they came in to convert us all to be Mormon, it would quickly turn into a T-Grog situation where everyone's like, bro, like, come on. Like, can we move past this? We know what your story is, right? I mean, we know what you want to, what you're going to say. We don't want to convert. It's like, and I can fall into orthobroism, so I have to be careful, and I get accused of that sometimes. But it's like, it's what I have. I'm sorry, but so it's a fine line. It's like, it's funny too, because it's like no one's ever like telling the Jews, hey, could you tone it down a little bit with the Jewish, with the Judaism? But it's like, hey, orthobro, come on. You're just like, okay. Well, you just have a fancy word that you can use to like that's derisive, right?
But well, I do appreciate that. I do if someone loves something, if someone believes something, I as someone who I do want to convince people of things and share things that I love with them. There's and you don't have to hang around with me too long to figure that out, that I want you to join my math cult, or
I am probably going to pick up Euclid, just so you know. Like I downloaded it just the other day, actually. So it's funny that you mentioned it.
Well, yeah. Oh, that is really funny. There's a website, Burns Euclid. It's a really good online website. That's just one version of Euclid. That's really kind of like artistic. That's how we first dipped our toes into it.
Mm.
So some guy digitized it and made a really nice website of it for free.
Oh, wow.
But the well is so much deeper than just that.
Yeah.
But like if you're a convinced LDS, like I do want you to try and convince me. I do want you to
Yeah.
share where you're coming from.
That's a good point. That's a
But
good point.
also, which is kind of the ethos of the corner of like, also, like if you're not curious about anybody else and open to learning stuff yourself, like if you're just only there to convert, then that kind of comes off as weird.
Yeah, well, and that or if you try to steer every conversation to converting me, it's like, dude, like we have other things in common, right? Like you and I, we're talking about, we have math and we have Euclid and we have, geometry and algebra and zero and, and poetry and poetic diction and Owen Barfield. And, there's a lot. Hello, Spatch. Welcome. It looks like we have another listener too. Hello. So anyway, it's just like, there's so many other interesting things to connect about. I kind of like the good faith nature of the corner. I really do. And I think that most people are pretty good about it. And most people do a pretty good job of policing it as well. But unfortunately, I do think that like when T-Grog comes in, sometimes it's just like, he just like sucks all of the energy of the room into
all of the attention, for sure.
Yeah. And then, and then he plays the whole, oh, I'm sorry, I guess I'll just leave, like that. It's just like another attention thing. It's like, dude, do you want to have a good faith conversation or not? Or do you just want to keep like asking questions?
Well, it's interesting what draws him there,
Yes.
I can't know his mind. I can only speculate. He says he's there to help people, to kind of wake them up from their error, help them see the truth. I mean, that's a noble endeavor.
Yeah.
But I suspect that it's more than that.
Yeah.
I suspect there's something that he's resonating with in the corner.
Yeah. Well, I think there is there's, well, okay. I can only speak from my own experience of being deconstructed from Mormonism into atheism and the scientism. And it was this idea of like, well, at least I can be sure of this, because I felt betrayed.
Sure.
I felt betrayed. And I felt like I had been taken advantage of, that my good faith and my good nature had been taken advantage of, and that I had been deceived. And I don't think that like my seminary teacher was actively part of the game, or my parents. I don't think that was it. I think the deception angle is much higher. And I started getting tastes of that the more involved I got in that community, and that's what ultimately caused me to walk away, was that I could start to see the active censorship at the higher levels, and the paranoia over the loss of control of the narrative as the internet started becoming a player in the conversations, and so I understand like being bitter, because I was very bitter and I was anti-religious for years. And I was the annoying guy who would bring it up in awkward situations where it didn't belong. I was that guy. Like, I don't think T-Grog understands that I was T-Grog for years of my life. And I harmed a lot of close relationships as a result of being just that guy. Right. And I pray that he can find a way out of it, because living in that space, at least for me, was very isolating. And I was very judgmental of the whole world, and thought that it was just a bunch of idiots.
Well, I think in the religious world doesn't do so great with it doesn't always do so great with how do we know what we know. And so people can feel betrayed, and then you're like, I don't want to I don't want to believe something I shouldn't believe again in the future. So
Yeah.
I'm going to adopt an epistemology that prevents that from happening. So whatever belief system, way of knowing that I need to adopt, I will adopt that.
Yeah. It is a way of feeling grounded and finding like a safe place of like, well, at least I can see this.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to accept anything, although you're accepting all kinds of presuppositions.
Yeah.
But at least there's this illusion of it being firm or ground to stand on.
Yeah.
And that what happened to me was, that fell apart in my hands too, as I started studying the fundamentals and the presuppositions behind it, and realizing that there was more to life, and that it was actually more useful to me to see the sunrise as the sun coming up and the sun going down than it was for me to say, oh, that's an illusion, and what's actually happening is that the earth is spinning on its axis, which gives me the illusion of seeing a sunrise. It's like, why do I need all of that layer of like qualification when I can just look at the sun and like physically watch it go up? Like, that's my empirical evidence, right? Is the sun comes up, and it affects when I wake up, it affects when I go to bed, it affects when I feel awake, it affects when I feel tired. Like, that's like, I started realizing the science was kind of pulling a bit of a magic spell on people and actually trying to like disembody them, in my opinion, or dissociate them from their own experience and then trust the experts, right?
Yeah,
It's like, it's ironic that like T-Grog is always like, well, you have to just listen to the experts of AI. It's like, what, they don't get it wrong, or they're not corrupt, or they're not open to corruption, they don't make mistakes, they're not aware of their own like solipsistic thinking, they're not aware of their own recursion, like it's like, it's a little silly.
Yeah, and not all the experts agree. So not just with each other, but some of them wouldn't agree with T. Grog's view of the world.
Correct. Yeah.
There's a book, again, I think this would be a very corner friendly book. It's written by a Catholic guy who was in Hollywood, Miles Connolly. It's called Dan England. No. Yep, that's right. Dan England and the Noonday Devil. And he has a little short story in there about a civilization. It's like a fictional thing, civilization that rejects technology. And his commentary on that is pretty interesting. And to be honest, I don't remember all the details. It's been a while since I read that book.
Yeah.
But and not that we should reject like all technology or view it as completely bad.
We're talking to each other, right, on the internet. Like, I have no problem with that, right? Like, there's air conditioning in my church, right? Yeah. And as a result, there's a lot more people come to church. Like, I get it, right? Like, however, it's not the only thing, right? I have AC at my church, but I would still go to church if there wasn't AC.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely have sympathies for T. Grog.
Yes, well, I was T. Grog.
I think the corner can't be too. I think the religious world, the Christian world, the corner should not be too harsh against them, because T. Grog's perspective is in the Christian scriptures. Yes. That voice is in the scriptures. And even after you become a believer, a follower, a Christian, a theist, all those things, even after you become that or adopt that way of viewing the world, that voice is not going to entirely go away. Right. Just read the Psalms. I think we should be more friendly to that voice. There's some foolishness in there, I think, but I have foolishness in my life, and we are going to, this idea that we're not going to is, I think, misguided. So I think it's part of our experience.
Oh, that's a very humble and true way of looking at it, Risto. I think it is good to have him there. I think it is good to have someone going, it's kind of like the idea of graffiti on the side of a beautiful building, right? It's like you need someone there to kind of tear down the pride a little bit, because it is easy to get carried away in the pride and in the abstract, like, woo-woo world. I mean, he has a fair criticism of that, and I actually welcome that. It's good. And Spatch had a question. He was asking me in the chat about whether I knew about Nemo, the Mormon story, and do I have any thoughts? I do have some a little awareness of that, because I'll share this. So Dallin Oaks, who is next in line to be the president of the Mormon Church, the prophet, seer, and revelator, is my grandmother's cousin. So yeah, so I have been following that story more than I would follow most stories because of his involvement. So it's an involvement, this Nemo guy, who was asking, basically what came out was that Dallin Oaks said he didn't know anything about the electroshock therapy going on against homosexuals at BYU in the 70s and early 80s. And then this guy did some research and found that that's not the case, that, because Dallin Oaks was the president of BYU at the time and was actually aware of it. And he was asking for an apology. He wanted a public apology. And he wanted an apology from the church for doing it. And he wanted an apology from Dallin Oaks for lying about it. And he kept asking, like, what do I do if I have and so what happened was he refused to sustain them at a conference. So that's like, basically, it used to be a vote, but it's not really seen as a vote. Now it's more like, I support this person being in this office. And he refused to accept that. Like, he refused to acknowledge, or he refused to endorse them, to confirm them. And so then they bring him into a conference and they're like asking him what's going on. And he's explaining why. He's like, this is not true. Like, a church leader has lied to us. Will he repent? And basically there was this whole runaround rigmarole with the church office building and the executive secretary of the 12. And he was just given like boilerplate answers. And then finally it came back where, it just kept escalating to the point where it was like, either drop it or we're going to excommunicate you. And he was like, I can't drop it.
Yeah. And he, I've watched a fair bit of Nemo stuff. I like the guy. He seems like a nice guy. But, like, he flew out to Texas to protest the building of a temple.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that level of fighting against the church you're in, and especially if you don't believe the truth claims of the church also, it's like,
yes,
at that point, it's like, it kind of makes sense that any organization would kick someone out who's.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with excommunication.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me at all. I think it makes sense, because you've violated the presuppositions, so to speak, or the code of conduct or the expectations of the body itself. You're a threat to the body, and it makes sense that they reject that person. I do think that, yeah, there is a bit of maybe a self-righteous anger there, or a self-righteousness, or a vainglory of like, hey, notice me for standing up against the big guy, right? Or against the big scary thing. And but we're all prone to that, like you said. I mean, I have a channel on YouTube, so I definitely have a bit of vainglory myself. So
Yeah,
I guess my fingers at that.
Yeah, some of the questions, like, why are you still in? Like, so let's contrast Nemo with, say, Martin Luther. Martin Luther, like, I don't think Martin Luther planned or wanted to leave the Catholic Church. Like, he saw issues, but I think he fundamentally believed in, like, that they were part of the true church, just with issues. Kind
Yeah,
of
he
like,
definitely wanted to debate it, and that was
yeah.
like a thing at the time. Yeah, he wanted to have a
But the debate
conversation on
wasn't like,
remorse.
the debate wasn't like foundationally there's no truth here, this isn't the true church. So I think there's a difference between wanting to, like, kind of, you agree with some of the fundamentals and you kind of want to purify this thing. You see some errors and misdirection and you want to reform the thing, versus, I think this whole thing is bad. I'm going to work to change it into something else entirely, which that's kind of the vibe I got from Nemo, because I think he's most active in the ex-Mormon community. And I think that their vision of the LDS church, their ideal LDS church, is just like a mainline Protestant church where you could be an atheist church leader if you wanted to be.
Right, where it's nominal, basically.
Yeah, it's just like, it's really nothing.
It's like cultural Mormon. Yeah, I meet a lot of those living in Utah. People who go to church just so that their kids will be raised going to church, right? Yeah, it's part of a culture, but it works. It works with. I mean, it works out that way in any like strong religious culture. You see the same thing in Romania. You see the same thing in Russia. You see the same thing in Greece, where it's like you go because it's your culture to go, and if you don't go, then you don't get involved in family events either, right? Like there's like a familial aspect to it, there's a cultural aspect to it, and I so I don't fault that either. I think that's part of we all have to wrestle with the culture that we grew up in, and then the culture that we want to continue to be a part of, and I think that's an active relationship. It's a one that you have to continue to renegotiate and recommit to yourself to, so.
Well, some of these guys should come on who are in the chat.
Yeah. Let me drop in the link if I can. Let's see.
I should probably run. It's been great to talk with you.
Risto, thanks for hopping in the inaugural episode. This is really fun, and it was really cool to get to know you better. You've given me some great books. I think you would really like the philosophical chapters from St. John of Damascus. For sure. And then you would have the Ladder of Divine Ascent as well, which is one of the greatest spiritual, like ascetic, like one of the most useful manuals to a Christian ascetic life that I think has ever been written. And I'm no authority on that matter, but it's been communicated to me that that's the case, that it's like, basically I read it during Great Lent. I usually read a chapter a day during Great Lent, and it's a chapter on how to overcome your passions. And so it's useful for every Christian. It's a very powerful and very insightful manual for living that.
And is that in that book?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it is.
It's a chapter called The Ladder of Divine Ascent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a whole, like that book that I shared that has 3 different books in it. And one of them is the Ladder of Divine Ascent is in there. So it's like all the writings of St. John of Damascus, basically. So yeah, I think you would really like both of those things. So
yeah.
Anyway, thanks again. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
That's it. Okay, well, now you're down to my sorry face. And I can go on as long as anyone, if someone else wants to come on and talk, I can. If not, then I probably won't last long, because it's getting to be evening time for me, getting ready. Oh, here we got a taker. Okay. Wes is here. Welcome, Wes.
Hey man, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing good.
Good.
Yeah. Saw you guys chatting about Oaks. I don't think I had heard about that situation.
Yeah, it's kind of making the rounds in the I sometimes just I lurk in the Mormon and then ex-Mormon subreddits. There's like three tiers of subreddit for for the Mormons. There's like the celestial and the terrestrial and the telestial kingdoms, right? So you have like our LDS is like active practicing. We don't want to talk about the controversies. Then there's Mormon, which is more like 1 foot in, 1 foot out kind of people who are trying to reconcile their faith or making their way out in both directions. And then you have the ex-Mormon subreddit, which is there's a few people who land into a different religion, but most people who are there are basically deconstructing God entirely, their relationship with God, and especially Mormonism. They think it's all just nonsense.
Yep.
And I was there in I've been through all of those stages in my life.
Yep. I used to hang out with Exmos for a really long time. And yeah, I used to argue with people on the internet in the like mid 2000s about all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I still do sometimes, unfortunately, sadly. Maybe not about Mormonism. I usually don't talk about that, but
what do you argue about now?
Oh, I usually, when I get involved in an argument online, it's usually on Hacker News in the comment section. And it's usually there's a big presupposition that everyone who's in tech is probably some level of definitely secular, and then probably some level of committed to woke. And and it's just kind of built into, like, if you're educated, this is how you see the world. And so I usually am there kind of poking holes in that, or just kind of like trolling usually, and saying, well, I'm the T-Grog of Hacker News, right? But like in the opposite direction. So I actually have a lot more sympathy for T-Grog than he would probably imagine. But because I kind of do the same thing where I just ask people questions of like, well, do you think like we humans share in nature? Like, do we have a, it's just little stuff like that where they're just like, or
Yeah.
I get the immune system response generally, which is fine.
Yep.
But yeah, when I get involved, or I get, in kind of I get in philosophical conversations there about like free will, or, stuff like, because it's all related to AI too, and AI is kind of a common topic of discussion there. So there's a lot of times where I'll end up like, because the Orthodox worldview kind of gives you a different perspective on that and on AI, and why I don't think it's ever possible that we'll have an AGI, but I don't think that that's the aim. I think the aim is to have a sufficiently sophisticated model that they can use to justify their policy decisions, and having a scapegoat to blame it on. Right. Me, I think that's what AI is. I think it's a misdirection. It's just a scapegoat for tyrants being able to justify being tyrannical.
Right. Blame it on the AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, they already do it with some, I won't mention anything because I don't want to get like a strike on my channel the first day I do the stream. With certain aspects of, policy decisions, they already use AI models to justify doing all kinds of tyrannical things. So,
yeah, hearing Peugeot talk about AI is pretty daunting. Like some of the stuff he said about it. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos, but
well, yeah, I have. But what do you have in mind? What are you thinking of particularly?
Well, just the demonic potential for it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I think that's also exactly what's going on. This there's actually a funny connection in my mind back to ancient Rome. Have you ever heard of the augurs?
It sounds kind of familiar. I'm not sure.
I'm gonna pull up something here. This is fun because on my stream, it's my stream, so I can just do it. Because this is like something I've been using this a lot lately to talk about AI at work. Because AI is becoming a bigger topic of discussion for us at my workplace as well. I think it is at a lot of people's workplaces. But let me share this. Hold on. Augur. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia, so we can trust it. Hear that, YouTube AI algorithm? You can trust Wikipedia. Okay, so an augur was a priest and official in the classical Roman world. His main role was the practice of augury. Augury was the interpretation of the will of the gods by studying events he observed within a predetermined sacred space, the templum. The templum corresponded to the heavenly space above. The augur's decisions were based on what he personally saw or heard from within the templum. They included thunder, lightning, and any accidental signs such as falling objects, but in particular, bird signs. So this ties back, and this was for the whole history of Rome. These people were the main advisors to the Roman Empire, or to the Roman emperor. And toward the end, like, that group kept getting bigger and bigger. And toward the end, they were actually accused of being corrupt, and that the emperors would just give them money and lavish like side benefits in order for them to see the things that he wanted them to see in what the birds were saying, so that he could do what he wanted to do. And I think this is what AI is. I think it's demonic, and it's divination, and it's corruptible and corrupted already out of the gate. But it goes back to when they very first established so the way they even discovered where Rome should be was Romulus was following, he was looking at the sky and he was following a bird and the direction that the bird flew. And that's how they decided where to even establish the position of Rome. And from then on, like, that became an active part of the Roman culture. Like, they just relied on this divination from birds.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it is something that I'd only become aware of recently, and I think that's what AI is. I think, so yeah, the auguria, the augural rites, were considered to be in equilibrium with the sacra, the sacred things or rites, and were not the only way by which the gods made their will known, but it was the main way. Anyway.
Yeah. And the way it's going, like, what they're going to be able to do with that, like, it's just unlimited potential for all kinds of disaster.
Yeah. Well, then you get the people arguing for the central planning of the economy, right? With the AI. We can use the AI to predict the economy. No, you can't. You can't predict that autistic kids are going to want fidget spinners to the point where all kids think they're autistic enough to need a fidget spinner in class. You can't predict that, right? Like, and then you can't predict that 6 weeks later, no one would be caught dead with a fidget spinner because only autistic kids use them, and then they all stop using them, and no one brings fidget spinners anymore, right? Yep. Like, it's just not. You can't predict people. You can predict people loosely, but the finer that you try to make your predictions, the more it falls apart.
Yep.
And there's too many variables to account for. You can't account for all the variables that affect people, and especially in an economy. You just can't. You can't do it.
Yeah. My son read this dystopian science fiction series called Scythe. Have you ever heard of this book?
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I think my daughter read it. Yeah,
it's a trilogy about, like, we've advanced to a level where we don't have to die anymore.
Yeah, my wife and my daughter both read that series. Yes.
And there's this thing called the Thunderhead, which is like the eye in the sky. It's sounds very AI, and, like, it basically directs everything. Mm-hmm. It's super just scary, and that's what AI, like, just the thought of it's like, man, bad news.
Yeah. Why would you surrender your agency to that? Right. Well, and then in that series, don't they have, like, guys who go around and, like, offing people, right?
That's the sides.
It's like this inner circle cult, and you're, like, basically the hands and feet and blades of the AI beast, right? The all-seeing eye of Sauron.
Yeah, exactly. And it's super dark. And yeah, you go around. Those guys can kill people, and they're the only ones that can, and they have to do that so we don't have too many people. Like, the whole thing is just creepy.
Yeah, that's wild. The AI will give everyone a guardian angel. I'm not sure what that means. I definitely don't agree. Well, my gut instinct is to definitely not agree with that, but I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Yeah. I guess that could be read a number of ways depending on what you mean by a guardian angel.
Yes, that's true. I don't know. I guess like if you had your own personal AI that you could like ask questions about, but I'm not going to do that. And what would it be guarding you from? That's the question I have too. Like a guardian angel from what? Like what is it guarding you from?
Right.
Guarding you from having a relationship with God? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like distracting you from that.
I think it would be.
Guarding you from pit bulls. Nice. Yeah, except for until your pit bull turns on you, until your guardian pit bull turns on you, right? Where it gets confused. Haven't you seen RoboCop, man? Come on. Or Terminator? Or The Matrix? Or all the movies of my childhood?
There's an episode of Black Mirror. Did you ever watch that show?
No. I just watched the one. There was one episode I watched, and I don't even remember it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, there was this one called Metalhead, and it was about these robot dogs that like would find people no matter where they were, and they like could unlock doors and do all this stuff, and they would like spray out these little microchips that would embed in you, and then they'd be able to find you wherever you go. Like it's super dystopia horror.
Yeah, I've heard stories of people who already have ultraviolet scars.
Really?
Yeah, for that reason, for being marked. So I don't know how much credence to put in that, but it's definitely something I've read in more than one place, that there are already people who can be tracked down. So to make it so that everybody was like that, that's pretty disturbing.
Well, and we can already be tracked down by our phones, so it's not really that, and we're volunteering for that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I hope. I've been trying to space myself away from them more and like add noise to the data, to that data stream by like throwing it in a Faraday bag sometimes. Because even turning it off doesn't work anymore because the battery's there. You can't take the battery out. So it can always be turned on. And it can be turned on remotely, and it can be listened to anytime. And obviously your location tells a story. Now I will say, I've watched my location data enough to know that the story is not super great all the time. It's not really complete, and it's not very good at guessing sometimes where you are. But I also just try to put noise in there, and I leave my phone at home sometimes, when I go out or I'm going to certain places or I'm going for a walk or whatever. I don't need Google and the government to know that I do those things, right? And it's not that I'm going anywhere nefarious. There's nothing. It's not like I'm doing anything wrong or illegal or anything like that. It's just more like when people have data, they try to build a narrative. They try to build a story around it. And then they're generally overconfident in the story that they make. And I want to make that as difficult as possible for anyone who wants to make a story about my comings and goings. That's my take on it. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't really want people making stories about me either, and that's inevitable, I guess, the way things are going. If like, why else are they tracking this information other than to find out what we like and where we go and what we want to buy? And that's probably the main thing. But well, yeah, and I think I definitely think there's a demonic element to it. There's a spiritual aspect to it of wanting to predict everything, but also from the wealthy people that I know, they also, especially like the super wealthy, I know a few of those, they abhor uncertainty. And they just want predictable 10% growth on their assets. And if they can find some way of doing that predictably, that's what they're after. And they use whatever means they can to try to create that scenario. The problem is you have competing groups trying to create that scenario for themselves, right? And that's why the wealthy eat themselves. Yeah, and with AI, that's just going to go on steroids because that's what's driving the whole thing. Yes, right. Right.
And hearing Vervaeke talk about it, like, I don't know if you saw that video too. I don't remember who he was talking to, but he seems to believe, like, he realizes the danger of it, the potential disaster of it. But he's like, but I think it's possible that won't necessarily happen that way. And I'm just like, I don't think so, man.
I think it's kind of like Better Health, that company that was doing the online therapy for so long, and like they got really popular and big, and then you found out that they were a lot of the people, they weren't vetting the therapists well, and they were selling your data to third parties. They were even letting third parties know when you were doing therapy sessions and how frequently you were doing them and how long they were, all this stuff, right?
That's a massive HIPAA violation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, but if a company is not in America, then what do you do, right? So yeah, that's a whole wild issue. But the reason I bring it up is because I heard someone today say that online therapy is one of those things where it's like there's 99 ways to get it wrong and only one way to get it right. And so your chances of actually getting it right are like so slim that it's just not worth the risk and the catastrophic downsides of getting it wrong. And I feel like it's the same way with AI, especially like, I hear people talking about AI and, the world championship of, the world champion of Go is an AI bot. I'm like, yeah, okay. Can that AI then get in a car and drive itself home? No. Can it make a sandwich? No. Can it tell me what the weather is right now? No, because it's been trained for one thing, to play Go. So great, you've got an autistic idiot savant who can play Go, but it has no context for what it means to be human. So how can it give us any recommendations on what we should do? Like the Go bot is not going to tell you what you should eat. And it doesn't matter how complex, like that's the thing with these models, right? Like what is most probable is not always what's accurate or what's correct or what's true.
Right.
And all they do is just tell you probabilistic, mutterings.
Yeah, whatever they're programmed to do. And the more this goes in that direction, man, it's just like, I don't know. I'm not.
Well, to me, it really comes down to the question of is consciousness computable?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a fundamental question. And I think it's the difference between, are you a nominalist or are you a realist? And a nominalist would say that consciousness is computable, and a realist would say it is not.
Yeah, I think I'm in that camp.
Yeah, and I am as well. I do not believe that consciousness is a computation, and I don't think it can be even modeled even close to adequately by a computer. Because a computer is an abstraction. It's an abstraction layered on. It's an abstraction, which means that it is an embedded worldview that is embedded into silicon and into the presuppositions behind binary math and the presupposition that you can map reality into binary math. And I do not agree with that presupposition.
Yeah. And I have a feeling that as it increases in ability and scope, like I can see people trusting in something like this.
Oh, yeah, they already do. Yeah.
They already do, right? But even to a higher degree, like, this thing is somehow objective and this doesn't have all the, all the problems that we have. So therefore we can trust it. I could totally see that happening.
Oh, I agree with you. You already see that. Somebody brought up an example with Google Maps, right? So somebody was saying, why can't we have an option for scenic by routes? Right? Like I want to get between this place and this place. I want to choose a beautiful way to go, not the fastest way. And one of the high ups at Google was saying, no. See, if we do that, then it could lead to you avoiding certain neighborhoods, and that might be racist. So we're doing what's objective, which is we're optimizing for fastest time, and that's objective. And it's like, no, it's not objective. You just chose a different one. You just chose a different optimization. That's it. There's nothing objective about it. There's nothing more objective about that than saying, I want to go a scenic way, right? I mean, I guess you could say, oh, well, beauty is subjective. It's like, okay, great. Fine. Like, let people give them options and let them pick an option. You know, you can do that a little more now in Google, but anyway.
And that one's pretty inconsequential though, right? Like at the end of the day, okay, it took me this way, whatever. I trusted it to take me this way. But if we start trusting it to do like morality and stuff like that, like
trolley problems.
Oh man, no.
Do you want your life based on like utilitarian trolley problems?
No.
Or pragmatism, like pragmatic trolley problems?
Nope.
That are just decided by an
utilitarian philosophy or something. Nope.
Yeah, and they've already baked in that utilitarianism or pragmatism is the way to make these trolley problem decisions, right? Like they've already baked that in, and then just go, well, that's subjective. It's like, no, it's not.
Nope.
There's so many layers of presuppositions built into that, but they just refuse to. I don't know if they refuse to see it, but they're, I think, incapable of seeing it a lot of times. Maybe willfully incapable.
Yeah, it sounds like there's just no real concern about it. Like, this is fine. Like, we're just going to open Pandora's box and we're just going to go down this path. And like, we're not really like, and yet all these guys have come out and signed this document, like saying this thing is freaky. Like people who understand it are signing this. And I'm like, dude, if the people who are creating this are saying it's dangerous, isn't that like a red flag to like, pay attention that maybe this isn't the best idea?
Well, and I'll bring a little bit of my background into this. You probably didn't catch the first part of the conversation, but I was sharing a little bit about chaos theory and like how I accidentally discovered it on my own, just from looking at a fabrication shop, like the output. But anyway, that's not super important. What's important is that the way the chaos theory was developed to begin with was there was a guy who was doing simulations, and he realized that he had only been rounding to 3 decimal places, and he wanted it to be more precise, and so he reran the same. It was like weather forecasting, and he reran the simulation again to 6 places, which was his original design, and he left the room and he came back and the results were widely different. And he was like, how did that happen? Like, all I did was add more precision. It should have been like a very minor difference. And it was the idea that a chaotic system is very sensitive to initial starting conditions. And so for me, this maps to the danger of AI in that one of the ways that you store a decimal in a computer is called a float. It's like a floating decimal, and it's a data type. A data type is called a float, right? I mean, one of the ways you can store a decimal is with a float. Now, the problem with float is that there are only 1 billion values between 0 and 1. And then there are only 1 more billion values for anything 1 and greater. So the more values you're trying to store, the less granularity you have. And what that means is that when you're trying to store numbers, you're actually rounding slightly. And when you have a chaotic system that is extremely sensitive to initial conditions, and you're rounding it slightly by storing it as a float, you're introducing vast divergence in the results, because it's a chaotic system. And if you have AI trying to predict a chaotic system, it's never going to be reliable as a result of that. Right? Now, there are ways around this. You can store your numbers as integers and then convert them to decimals on computation, but most models are not doing that. They're not accounting for it. They just take in the presupposition that float is how we store floating decimals. And it's like, yeah, but that means you're rounding them. And if you're rounding them, you're introducing noise into a chaotic calculation. You're unpredictable at that point, right?
Yeah. Wow. That feels right in that same vein of danger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're introducing, and you see this. I don't want to talk about the details of which particular science uses this right now already in a problematic way, because then I'll end up with a Wikipedia banner under my video. My very first video has a Wikipedia banner. But anyway, it's just it's already being used this way. And it's not in just one field, in a lot of fields. They build models that are wildly divergent from real results, and they keep trying to refit the models to the new data, and then they overfit it, and then it becomes irrelevant very quickly because reality is too complex to predict. And that's what it comes down to. And I think the demonic desire, which is what is behind divination and sorcery, is the desire to predict. And God is saying, don't worry about what happens tomorrow. Worry about today. Sufficient is the evil to the day thereof, right?
Yep. There you go.
So,
yeah, man. Speaking of faith, what did you think of the Pope's recent statement about all religions are a path to God?
I'm trying to think of how to best say that. I mean, that's perennialism.
Yep.
And I don't believe in perennialism. I don't believe that that's true. I mean, it goes against what Christ himself said. And also, now that being said, I also fully believe what Apostle Paul said, which is if you don't, if you're not introduced to Christ in your life, you'll be judged by your conscience, right? Like, I believe that. What that means, I don't know. That's what God's work is, right? God knows these things.
It's out of our hands. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's a very dangerous precedent. Oh, Risto, that's a good question. Hold on. Is nature a path to God? Well, neo-pagans would say yes. But to me, so there's an Orthodox saint who put this really well, and it kind of blew my mind. And he said, the whole concept of truth being a what, if you think of truth as a what that you can either rationally discern or rationally or logically, deductively reason yourself to, you will ultimately end up as a pantheist. But the truth is that the ultimate truth, capital T truth, is a who.
Yep. A person.
It's a person that you can have a relationship with, but that also means that the truth is dynamic. The truth cannot be systematized any more than your wife can be systematized or your daughter can be systematized.
Or any person. Yep.
Yeah, you can't write a series of if-then statements that will capture a person, right? And so is nature a path to God? I think nature is a path to pantheism. If you study nature in and of itself. If you see nature as a revelation of God's glory and wisdom and beauty, then
it can point to God.
Yeah, it can point to it in a way that beauty can redeem you, right? Like, I do believe that beauty has a redemptive quality. I do believe that beauty has a way of healing. So in the ancient Greek fathers, they talk about the nous, and they say the nous. It's translated usually as intellect or mind, but it doesn't translate well, from what I understand.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of videos about that recently. Like, the guy said that, and he's like, "All right, now don't get mad at me. It's more than mind. I know there's a big thing about that, but yeah."
Yeah, it's spelled Nous, by the way. That took me a while to find. So nous, but it's understood as the organ by which you apprehend God. That's the way that they would understand it or translate it. And our nous has been broken or damaged by the fall, and then further damaged by our secular culture and the barbarism that we live in, and just the degeneracy that we're surrounded by. That basically clouds the nous or damages it or harms it or makes it not function properly. So it means we can't apprehend God. But I believe that beauty is the way to begin to heal the nous. And as you begin to heal the news, you're able to see the good. And as you're able to see the good, you're able to discern the true. So it's kind of the opposite approach that the West takes, where they take a truth first approach. Like, let's agree on our propositions and make sure our propositions are right and communicate all this information to you about what's true. And then eventually you'll be able to see beautiful things. You'll have the beatific vision, right? Like the Orthodox take the opposite approach, and they take the beauty first approach, of beginning to heal your nous by looking at beautiful things. That's the purpose of the icons. That's the purpose of the beautiful architecture. That's the purpose of the hymnography. You're being healed by beauty in order to be able to apprehend the good and the true over time. So.
Okay, so here's something that happened at the Greek Orthodox Church that I went to. I've been 3 times now. And the second time I went, I was in line to get the blessed bread.
Yeah.
And we're standing along the wall, and I accidentally bumped an icon, and it fell off the wall onto the ground and made this really loud sound, and it was really embarrassing. And I pick it up, and I pick it up and I hang it back up, and I'm like, oh man, I have a feeling that was probably like a massively bad thing to do. And the next time I came back, the spot where that one was hanging, it wasn't there.
Whoa. Wow.
So I know that they take those things really seriously. And so do you think that that was considered like defiled or something?
I haven't heard of anything like that. That's a good question. That would be something that a priest would have to talk about. I don't have enough familiarity with the details of handling icons. I do know that when an icon is damaged, they're not always discarded, but when you discard an icon, you do so by burning. So we burn holy things to get rid of them. We also burn unholy things, but not together. So if you have like witch books in your house, you burn those in one fire. And then if you have holy things that need to be discarded, you burn them separately. And then we discard those. You usually put those ashes in a place where they won't be disturbed. Usually like along the side, like really close to the foundation of your house or someplace like that, where they won't be dug up and walked on or bothered like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, as far as this, like if it was damaged, maybe they did get rid of it.
Okay.
Because sometimes like they'll split apart. Like if it's made of plywood, if it falls like that, this plywood will split and then it will start, if you live in a humid culture, it'll start deteriorating at that point. So
maybe that was it. Yeah. I hope I didn't offend anybody.
No, there are a lot more. It's a much bigger deal if something happens with the Eucharist.
I bet. Yeah.
But an icon itself, I think if it was damaged, they would remove it. But the fact that it was an accident and it wasn't deliberate, I think wouldn't be, they would ask you to be careful.
Sure. Yeah.
That's part of being in a new environment, right? And I think people in the Orthodox Church understand that when people are new and they come in and they don't know and they're unfamiliar, there's a lot of grace extended to that, to that position and to that mindset, because we've all been there. Even people who grew up in Orthodoxy still understand how foreign it is for someone to come in and be in a very different, environment. So it's, I don't think anyone was, I would guess that no one was offended. If they were, then they can repent for judging you. So.
Yeah. No one said anything to me, and it seems like everything's fine. So
yeah, I wouldn't sweat about it. And like I said, if something was done to it, then they'll take care of it properly.
Right. Yeah. No, it's been good though. I've been enjoying it, and just taking it all in. And the Greek festival actually starts tomorrow for the weekend.
Oh yeah. It's that time of year. Yeah.
It's that time of year. Yeah.
Yeah. Ours was a couple of weekends ago. So yeah.
Yeah. I've never been, so should be interesting.
Yeah. The food's great. I love the Greek food. It's fun to watch the Greek dancing. It's also, I think I would suggest they usually do like tours of the church where they talk more about the iconography and just kind of like the layout of the church and what's going on there. You probably are familiar with that with Pajot, but it's worthwhile to just go through that and be introduced, by usually a priest or a deacon is leading those. So they usually can answer questions and stuff too.
Yeah.
So,
nice. Yeah. I've been learning lots of stuff, watching lots of videos, and just seeing different guys speak about orthodoxy and history of it. It's been interesting. I've also seen some critic videos of people who are critical of orthodoxy, and that's interesting as well. And
yeah. Well, what's always interesting to me is that it seems like a lot of them think they're bringing some like novel complaint or novel like issue with the church, and it's like, guys, like
they've all been done. Probably
we know we've heard these before. Like, you're not the first Protestant who's like, oh, you guys are idolaters. It's like, maybe there's more to the story than what it appears from
or here's one I heard yesterday. It's folk religion.
Folk religion. Interesting. Well, this is, that's interesting. I read St. Maximus the Confessor and get back to me on that, or read the homilies by St. Basil the Great and get back to me on that. Right. Like,
no, I listened to that Cosmic, I forget the title of it, but Cosmic something by Maximus.
Oh, man,
that was intense.
Yeah, it's extremely sophisticated, but this is the beautiful thing I like about it too, and I think it's another sign of the truth of it to me, is that it does scale down to the folk and to the peasant and to the illiterate. There's many saints who are illiterate, who never, I mean, St. John the theologian, right? St. John, the brother of Christ, was illiterate, but he was, he's one of those who are closest to Christ. And the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, are two of the most profound and
he was considered illiterate.
Yeah, he couldn't read. Those were written by a scribe.
Wow.
He couldn't read. He couldn't write.
He just relayed all that to a scribe.
Yeah. He just he told all that to a scribe. So look at the first chapter of John, the prelude to John, the prelude to the Gospel of John, and you
doesn't get much more mystical and intense than that.
Right. Yeah, and also tied to the Old Testament, right? It's got all these ties, metaphorical ties to the Old Testament. The structure of it's the same as the Old Testament, right? So it if that's folk religion, then I'm in. Like,
right. Sign me up. Yeah,
right. Like, I don't understand that. Like, I don't really understand the nature of the criticism. It's like,
well, this guy is a pretty hardcore academic Calvinist. And those guys always seem to be very concerned with systematic theology and all that kind of stuff, which is very different than an Orthodox perspective.
Yeah. Although we do have a church, there was I think it was Staniloy who did a systematic theology of the church in the 20th century. And it's profound and insightful and
really an Orthodox systematic.
Yeah. Let me look it up. Hold on.
For some reason, I was under the impression there was no systematic perspective.
Well, we avoid it. Yeah, we avoid it for sure. But let's see. Oh, maybe I had the wrong person too. Let's see. Okay, let me pull this up. Let me share this.
I was curious about that other book you had mentioned too when right before I came in. I didn't hear the title.
Okay. You'll have to tell me what I was talking about.
You were talking with the other guy about a book that you had recommended him.
Oh yes, St. John of Damascus. I'll pull that up in a minute too. 1 second. Before we go on that one, let me share this one that I was mentioning. So, Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, a Concise Exposition. Oh. So this one would be. So this is probably not the one I'm thinking of.
Seraphim Rose. Okay, I've watched a video on that guy. Okay.
So he translated it into English from Russian, and this one was used as it's one of the best introductory books to Orthodox theology, and it was used as a theology textbook at the Holy Trinity Orthodox Seminary in Jordanville, New York. So, but this is not the one I was thinking of. But this is a good book. This is very.
You've read this one?
Yes, this is a very great book. This is really good.
That guy had an interesting life. Sarah from Rose.
Yes, that is definitely true. Yeah, that is definitely true. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that one. The other one I shared with Risto is where to go. Okay, let's go back to StreamYard and present, share screen, and did I put it away? I put it away. Hold on, sorry. St. John of Damascus. Yeah, this one. Okay. So this one has been very helpful in okay. I'm not very good at multitasking. I'm sorry. I'm kind of a one thing and a brain at the time kind of guy.
No worries.
Okay, so this one, Writings, the Fount of Knowledge. So this has 3 books in it, actually, from St. John of Damascus. It has the Fount of Knowledge, and it has the philosophical chapters. Oh, wait, no. The Fount of Knowledge, the philosophical chapters is one. There's another one called On Heresies, and then On the Orthodox Faith. And St. John of Damascus, the On Heresies one, he talks about all kinds of heresies, but also it includes the defense of icons.
Oh, cool.
That he wrote for the Fifth Ecumenical Council. And then On the Orthodox Faith. Oh, I thought it had the Ladder of Divine Ascent in there too, but it looks like it doesn't. So anyway, what it does have that's really useful, though, and the reason I was recommending it to him were the philosophical chapters. So in the philosophical chapters, he basically lays out like a intro to Platonism and intro to Aristotle. It's like intro to philosophy and philosophical terms in the way that they've been used by the early Greek church fathers.
Mm.
And so it really helps to read that before you start. And then he also has the exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, which is another really foundational, fundamental thing to read if you want to understand the church. But the philosophical chapters, the nice thing about that is that it gives you the grounding you need to understand what these terms even mean, the way that they're used by the church fathers. So it's really great.
Good. Awesome. I'll definitely add that to my list.
Yeah.
It's been so interesting learning about all this stuff. I'm also listening to a podcast. This guy's an Orthodox. He's a historian. He's a church historian. I can't remember his name. I think Peugeot did an interview with him. I think that's where I heard about it. And he's written like a 4-part series, I think, on the history of the church from an Orthodox view. Really interesting.
Oh, yeah, John Strickland. Father
Strickland.
John Strickland. Yeah, yep. Father John Strickland. Yeah, he's a historian. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm really enjoying that. I feel like I'm like learning this whole other like element of the faith that I just didn't even know about at all. Like,
yeah,
it's crazy to think that. Like, I thought I understood things, but the more I'm diving into this, I'm just like, what? How is this possible? How could I not know about this?
I know. Yeah, there's been a spell that was put on us to blind us to 2,000 years of Christian history, essentially.
Yeah, like it's a big deal. Yeah, it's a really big deal. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm also just like my mind just keeps being blown over and over again. Where I'm just like, what, really? Like, what? How is this possible? Like, I'm having a hard time getting my head around that aspect of it. And really, Orthodoxy's only been over here for like a very short period of time in America, right?
Yeah, correct. It was brought over really in the early 1900s. There was some presence of it in Alaska in the 1800s, but it was really like the immigration push that happened after World War I, between World War I and World War II, and then after World War II.
That's when the one was built in my town. It was built in like 1925, almost exactly 100 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. That's about when Orthodoxy was kind of hitting the shores. And at that time, there was a Saint Raphael who was going around. He was from the Russian church, but he was just going around and doing liturgies for everybody. He was doing it like he just kind of had permission to just do liturgies for, he learned it in Greek, he learned it in Arabic, he was doing it for this, the Syrians, for the Lebanese, he was doing it for the Greeks, and he was doing it for the Russians because there was just no priests that were coming over. It was basically viewed as like it was basically viewed as a punishment if you were sent to be a priest in America.
Wow.
It was viewed by the priests, to be a punishment because you were forced to leave home, you were forced to leave your motherland, you were forced to leave your family, your culture, you were being thrust into a foreign, Protestant culture, and it was very uncomfortable. People were homesick, and so it wasn't. There were priests did not want to come.
Yeah, that would be a tough thing.
Yeah, it was hard.
Well, I really enjoyed hearing your story at the conference, and I'm curious to hear more stories of people and how they've come to Orthodoxy. I know there's a number of people in the corner who are Orthodox, so I've asked Sherry. Sherry said she's going to eventually share more with me, and so if anyone else out there hears this and wants to do videos on it or whatever, I would love to hear more because it feels like a really meaningful entry into just how God works in all kinds of situations. And I'm really enjoying it.
Well, glory to God. That's great. I use the really poor analogy of basically it's like platform 9 3/4 for me, where like from Harry Potter, right? Where there was that platform that was hidden in plain view and, it was right there, but you couldn't see it until somebody pointed at you at it. And then they kind of just like grab your hand and pull you through. And what's really fun is that, I like catching people on the other side after they've come through the door, the door that's in a brick wall, and then hearing that story as well. I love hearing, because it seems like a lot of people kind of go through similar journey, but yet each person has their own little unique, path to getting to a point where you're open enough to be able to take in something so different from what we were exposed to and raised in, especially, us, our background is particularly unique. It's because a lot of challenges that come with that, and being able to kind of reopen up to a relationship with God in a mystical way and in a very different way than the literal relationship or the literal, understandings that we're handed as kids is a different. It requires. I think a lot of people have a common kind of milestones that they pass to get to that.
Yeah, but it is vastly different, and the idea of theosis, right, within Mormonism, there's this, I don't know if you want to call it pseudo theosis or like some other type of divination or divinization, maybe is the right word.
Yeah.
But what I'm understanding about Orthodoxy is it's a completely different thing. You're not, and the whole essence energies distinction, and I'm learning about that. Like you don't become the essence, but you are moving in the direction of the energies, something like that.
Yes. Yeah. So the easiest, so the Mormons would say, as God is, or as man is, God once was. As God is, man may become.
Yeah, Lorenzo
And I
Snow.
think it's kind of an eternal cycle where you have mankind who then progresses through obedience to perfection to become a god. The whole idea of being a god is kind of an office in the priesthood. There are many gods, they're polytheists, and they believe that that's a kind of an eternal cycle that goes on over and over again. They believe that matter is eternal and that God is subject to the same laws that we are, including the physical laws, but that through perfect obedience to those laws, then physical and spiritual matter is obedient to him. So it's kind of like this, like recursive or circular kind of.
Yep. Never ending circle. Yep.
Yeah. And actually my daughter, after reading the Iliad and the Odyssey last year, she's in high school still. She actually came to me. She's not Orthodox yet. but she was dating a Mormon boy at the time. And she actually came to me and said, Dad, I think the Mormons are pagans. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of overlap between the Mormon view and the Platonic view or the Aristotle view. I think they would lean more toward Aristotle than Plato, but there's definitely Platonism in there, which is the whole idea that we were spirits before we existed. We knew the forms, then we come down into a body. It's a trap, and it's also like a prison for our spirit, but we need it in order to become, in order to understand reality, in order to return back to the reality, to the realm of the forms, and reunite with perfection. And Platonism is basically that you lose your personality as you do that. You like reunite with the monad, and then there's no particularities, there's no distinctions.
Like
whereas the Mormons would say, that's just a cycle that repeats. So so then in contrast to that, the Orthodox would be that we can never become fully like God, because God is uncreated and we are created. So he's above and outside all category, outside of all comprehension, and we can never fully comprehend him, because we will never be able to comprehend an uncreated being because of our created nature. But through his condescension and through his love for us, taking on our nature in Christ, and reuniting us, and through reconciliation, we'll be able to eternally be participating at a deeper and deeper level in who God is, and that goes on for eternity. It's something that you never get to the bottom of, because we're always getting closer and closer without actually ever being able to fully bridge the gulf.
Yeah, and that's night and day from the other thing. Like it's not even in the same realm. Like it's a totally other thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's a different category. And so the word I would use for the Mormon view would be apotheosis, where you are basically perfecting yourself. The atonement is there to cover for you learning along the way, but you're ultimately becoming more knowledgeable and more obedient yourself, to the point where you become God. Like you're awarded an office in the priesthood called God, kings and priests, or queens and priestesses. And that would be an apotheosis, much like you read about in Freemasonry, which there's no coincidence between that. So it's kind of self-willed godhood, rather than becoming united with God through a crucifixion of our own will.
Yeah. And man, I just got to say, the whole thing about the other view of original sin, the sinful nature, versus what it sounds like is much more of in the Orthodox view, it's more of a healing. It's not this corrupted sinful nature in the same way that's understood in other perspectives, but it's this healing that you experience. Is that how you understand it?
I'm sorry, I was distracted because I was answering Risto's question in the chat. Please forgive me. Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
Just the difference between understanding original sin, that the corrupted sinful nature view, more of the Augustinian hardcore corrupted sinful nature, total depravity view, versus we sin is the issue for sure, but it's more we need healing, and so that difference feels really significant to me also.
Yeah, I would term it in terms of a legalistic view versus a sickness view.
Yeah.
For me, that's the biggest way. That's the easiest way of making the distinction.
Yeah.
Because, they see the law as being violated, and the law that requires a punishment in order to fulfill justice. And there is some of that in the Orthodox view, of course, right? There's legalistic language in the scriptures, of course, but it's more of an emphasis. And the emphasis is on viewing sin as a sickness, and it's a symptom of our fallen nature.
Yeah.
But that by submitting our will to Christ and participating in the life, the ascetic life, the Christian life of crucifying our own will, our nature begins to be healed.
Yep.
And that the seeds of those healing are planted at baptism, and that it's our role to co-create with Christ our new life, and in his image, and in the image that he has for, to regain our likeness. So, in Genesis, it says we were created in the image and likeness of God, and that in the fall, we lost the likeness, and that's what will be restored as we are healed through Christ.
Yes. The restorationist, it's a restoration versus I'm just this total piece of crap.
Right.
Right. And I just think that distinction, I, as a therapist, I see this with people all the time who they just hate themselves. They're just a piece of crap. And the other view of sin, I think, reinforces that in a way that makes it really hard for people to see beyond that sometimes. And so this view, in my opinion and experience, is just way more helpful for a person in so many ways, that you are made in the image of God. And yes, that image has been tainted, but it's not snuffed out. It's not like you're just totally depraved and you can't, you're not connected, or you're not still, you know what I mean? Like there's a different,
like getting mad at somebody when they have the flu, right?
Yeah.
Like, think about that, right? Like, if your kid has the flu, you're not like, go out, mow the lawn. What are you doing, you lazy balls? Why are you laying around? Like, God looks at us like we have the flu.
That's great.
He's not like writing a ticket for speeding,
Yeah, man, that's just, so for me, that's huge. And I think there's so many people who've struggled because that hasn't been offered. That way of looking at it hasn't been offered. So I think that's huge to me. And I just see a lot of that, and I can see for myself how helpful that is too.
Yeah, same for me. I grew up with that self-hatred and that despair, right? Like the I'm irredeemable, and I sinned, and now I'm unworthy, and it made me terrified of death. It made me extremely anxious, and it made me afraid of dying at any given moment, because I was going to die in my sins, and I haven't repented. And how do I know if I've repented? And how do I know if I'm worthy? And I'm not, because I did this thing last night.
Yeah.
Girl there, and it's like
right. It's never ending. It's horrible.
It was very anxiety inducing, and it took a long time. I'm still being healed of that. I'm still being healed of that damage.
Yep. And I've heard you and others speak of like in this way of like I'm sinning all the time, but it's not in this self-hating way, right?
Right. It's not in a I'm not redeemable way, because that in itself is also a form of pride, of saying, wow, my sins are so bad that there's no way God can forgive my sins. Right. Bro, like it's like take the image the saints use is like, it's like grabbing a handful of sand and throwing it in the ocean. Like, that's the effect that your sins have on God. Like, it's just like, nothing.
Wow.
It's easy for him to forgive. It's just, he's asking us to repent. He's asking us to surrender, to acknowledge it, to look at ourselves, to look at the unpleasantness, to look at the darkness, and to acknowledge it, and to say, yes, I am broken, but I throw myself at the mercy of God's feet, right?
Yes.
And to wash his feet with our tears, right? To wet our pillow with our tears in repentance, and realize that we are ultimately and completely dependent on God and his mercy. But thankfully, mercy always comes before justice in the scriptures, right? Like when it says God is merciful and just, it always says merciful first. Right? Thank God, right?
Very grateful for that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I heard this great story about this monk who was an alcoholic, apparently. He became a monk later in life, and I guess his mother like drank while he was in the womb. So like his whole life he was like, had a really hard time with alcohol. And so he would drink like some insane amount of beer every day. And all the other monks were like, man, this guy, get this guy out of here. Like, this guy's a horrible monk. He shouldn't even be here. And the main leader guy, I forget what that position is called.
Story, yeah.
Say again?
St. Paisios.
Okay, yeah. So you're familiar with this one?
Yeah.
And he said, just drink one less a day. And by the time he was, I don't know how old, he was down to like
per year. He would go down one a day per year, right? So
right.
like, yeah.
And that was such a beautiful story of grace, right? Like just seeing someone where they're at and what they've been through, and being able to say, hey, we want you to move in this direction, and here's what we're asking. Like, just take one step at a time, a day. Like, that's just beautiful.
Well, for me, one of the fundamental changes was this idea of like going from the idea of worthiness, right? Like, you're not worthy. You're never worthy to be in the presence of God, which is why you're not. Thank God, right? Out of mercy, he does not appear to us. Right?
Yeah.
Out of mercy, we don't see demons. Out of mercy, we don't see angels. Out of mercy, because we would either become prideful or terrified. And
every time they're mentioned in the scripture, people are terrified.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so anyway, instead of this idea of worthiness, what replaced it for me was learning that holiness, what it means to be holy, is to be struggling. Holiness is the struggle. It's not perfection. We are called to be perfect, but struggling toward perfection is holiness. That's it. You're surrendering, and then you're crying out to God in prayer, asking for mercy. And it's not that you're begging for, him to not destroy you. It's mercy. Mercy is like what they called the olive oil that they would pour on somebody who had wounds. They would put olive oil into the wound to accelerate the healing process. That was mercy. It was medicine. That's what we're asking.
Yeah.
We're asking for the medicine that will heal our spiritual wounds.
Yeah, that's good. The struggle is the thing.
Yeah, holiness is the struggle. Yeah, that's such a huge difference, right? Because it's not about, it's just the idea of when you fall down, you just get right back up. That's what it means to be an Orthodox Christian.
Right.
You just get up, you ask for forgiveness, bring it to confession.
And it makes sense too, because if we do arrive at something, then of course we're going to be prideful about that. So it just makes sense that it's just the ongoing thing, and there's kindness in it. There's grace in it. There's mercy in it. There's not harshness and meanness. And I really appreciated Chris Green's talk at the conference, and the whole idea of judgment without condemnation. Oh man, that was great. I've never heard judgment talked about in that way before.
Yeah. It's like it meant like justice just means things as they should be.
Yes.
Right. But we don't know what that means.
Right. We've never lived in that.
We have no concept of divine justice whatsoever. We have no comprehension of it. That's what the book of Job is about. The book of Job is, you don't know how I run the world, and you never will.
Yeah.
Because I was there when I made it and you weren't. Right.
Yeah, that's powerful.
So it is that humility that we don't understand what's going on here, and everything that's going on here is God's will. And if you see it that way, that's what we're striving to do. We're striving to see everything as God's will, and accepting that and being grateful for it. Right. So all the bad things too, all the difficult things, the painful things, you go, thank you, Lord. Glory to God for all things.
Yeah, boy, that's one. That's I got some work to do on that one.
Oh, we all do. Right. Oh, there's a quote. I'll share a fun quote with you. It's related. Let me pull it up real quick. I have to find it. Okay, yeah, this is it. I'll share this real quick. Let me hide that. Go back. Whoops. No. No, back. And that. Okay. And now go back to here. Man, I'm not very adept at switching things yet, but I will be. We'll get there.
You're more at it than me, man. I would have no idea what to do.
Oh, well, I've always unfortunately been an early adopter of tech. No, not that one. Oh, wait, window. This is it. Okay, let me share this with you. Okay, this is a quote, Elder Emilianos of Simona Petra. The basic understanding of our church, as well as the experience of everyday life, is that no one can become holy if they don't have people around them who constantly annoy them with their behavior, with insults, criticisms, laziness, malice, and slander. If you don't have such people, or if you don't think them, but react negatively to what they do, there is no salvation or spiritual progress for you, because that makes a person mature. It humbles them. Not in the sense of the humility of the saints, far from it, but it makes them capable of living life. Whoever doesn't have people who constantly make pitfalls for them can't live life. They become someone bothered even by a fly. If they are a monk, years pass in vain for them, and if they are married, they get divorced.
Oh, man. That is a little just slice of truth right there.
But it's a really good perspective to keep in mind, right? Like,
yeah.
I struggle with this a lot, where I'm learning to thank God for the challenges and the discomforts and the annoyances and the, no air conditioning in my truck and all the little things that add up to. Used to be me being very irritable, and now I'm still irritable, but I try to thank God for being irritable. No, I try to thank God for those things because it reminds me of my reliance on him.
Mm.
I can't deal with those people on my own. I've tried my whole life.
Yep.
But if I thank God for those people, then all of a sudden I have a grace, and it's a little easier for me to be a little more patient.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good. I'm gonna print that one out and put that one up, because I think I need to read that every day.
Yeah, I wonder if I can make it bigger. Hold on, let's see. So you could screenshot it. Let me see if I can.
I actually zoomed in on it and screenshotted it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there we go. We made it
Yeah.
bigger. Oh, good. Now I'm learning how StreamYard works. There you go.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
Now
Good
you
stuff,
can.
man. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one I come back. I've been coming back to a lot lately. This one just came into my life when I needed to hear it, and thankfully it didn't come in before I was ready. Because that's a big ask right there. That's difficult.
Sure is. And it's the antithesis of the world we live in to think that way. Like, that's not how people think most of the time at all. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the problems in our culture. You probably see this more than I do in therapy, being a therapist, but in the young men that I work with at church and and just people I work with, people just like, and modern people, this is one of the things I argue about on Hacker News, to be honest with you, is people running from suffering and thinking it's like the worst thing that can possibly happen to them is like them being uncomfortable. And, various levels of being uncomfortable, but like, even to the point of like, I talk to some young men and I'm like, dude, just start taking a cold shower. And they're like, why would I do that? That's the worst. Like, why would I be uncomfortable? That's just going to start my day and make me irritable. And I'm like, yeah, because you'd learn how to not be irritable by being uncomfortable. That's why you do it, bro. Like, you have to practice being uncomfortable, and it's a lot easier to practice when you choose it than it is when you don't choose it.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, it's a big, people run from suffering, and
yes.
I think this is another way of kind of like leaning into the suffering instead of running from it or complaining.
100%. And I see it all the time. And I mean, I see a whole range of different things, and some is actual genuine suffering that's really hard for people, and people who've had a really hard time and quits, right? There's certainly that, but that's on the far end of one side, and then the other side is these very small things that I'm just like, all right, why are you here? Like, what exactly is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish here? And usually, most of the time, the vast majority of it, it's communication between couples who don't know how to communicate with each other and are getting very upset about really stupid things that really don't matter. And they just don't know how to talk about stuff. And they get triggered and defensive and argumentative. And yeah, me too. I'm with you. I tell people all the time as I'm doing therapy, I'm like, look, just so you know, I'm telling you this as a person who isn't very good at it. So don't think that I am some like master who has arrived at some lofty thing. That's not the case.
Yeah. Well, I think most of the things that led to my arguments, I had two things that really led to most of my arguments. One was if my wife could just hear and understand what I was saying, she would agree with me.
Yeah.
My way was the right way of seeing things.
Yep.
And two, that when she didn't, it's because she wasn't understanding what I was saying.
Yep.
And that is very prideful. That's extremely prideful. That's very hubristic. And I could not see my own pride in that. And also what I've learned since being Orthodox, and my wife is also Orthodox. We got baptized within 6 months of each other.
Nice.
Is that one, we needed a higher power for both of us to be trying to surrender to, because for most of our marriage, it was a power struggle and we didn't trust each other and we didn't have anyone else to submit to. And so neither of us were willing to submit to the other one ever. And then two, the other problem we had was that just in our native ways of looking at things, we're using the same words, but we mean very different things by them. And we were frequently talking past each other and assuming that the other person knew what we were talking about.
Yes.
But we have generally like a fundamentally opposite way of coming at things. And some of it's male, female, and some of it's just personality. And just the way we think, I reason differently than she does. And as a result, we would end up in the middle meeting, but it took a lot of, and now it just takes, the other thing I've learned to do is just, actually listen and to not try to guess what she was going to say or or think that I knew the deeper meaning of what she was saying. Or that I knew what was actually going on that she was not aware of in her own brain because I'm some kind of insightful psychologist person, because I'm in the I am very smart club, right? All this pride just wrecked my marriage for most of my marriage.
Rough. Yep. I can echo all of those things for sure. And it's tough. It's tough to not, you can't see it. You don't see it when you're in it, right. During that time, that was just complete blindness to any of that.
Right.
And so, that, and having someone to submit to like that, I think that piece is huge. Like,
I agree.
Knowing someone is above you, who's forgiven you, like, okay, I've been forgiven. What am I doing holding this debt to somebody? Like what that's not, and if both people are aligned in that direction, like I don't see how anybody could survive any kind of marriage without that. Like
that's what I think.
If I ever get married again, like that's the only way I'm even going to even remotely consider it. Like there's no way. I don't care how hot this person is. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, every hot chick has a guy who's in her life who's sick of putting up with her shit. That's
I think I've seen a bumper sticker like that or something.
No, that's the old red pill like mentality.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of truth to that.
Yep.
So
yeah, good stuff, man. Well, have you been on here for 3 hours?
Yes, 3 hours and 3 minutes. I was just gonna say I actually need to go to bed. I'm Please forgive me, but I'm going to my cousin's funeral tomorrow. I'm very, very plaintive and prayerful about that. He committed suicide a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, it's very. It's the second one in my family. Between, my mother and father's family, and there's multi-generational trauma in both family lines. A lot of dark stuff and a lot of hidden skeletons in the closets, and things that come out. Within days of someone dying, we learn all of these dark things, and not that we did in this case. I'm not saying that about my cousin. I'm just saying about what. I think a lot of these battles are multi-generational, and that it's not just a result of our own, struggles. It's very sad. It's very tragic. So definitely
it's compounded. Yeah, for sure. Compounded and added, and man, that's tough. Well, I will.
Well, and then when we're in a broken culture, and we don't have a lot of family, and we don't have a lot of connections, and most people don't have a church, and they don't have any kind of framework for dealing with these things, and they don't know how to deal with them, and they don't know how to process it, and they don't know how to process their grief, and they don't know how to process, the trauma that's happened to them, and they don't know how to forgive. They've never been taught any of these things, and they're just ripped apart, Yeah.
And
I think my cousin was one of those. So, clearly, to get to that point.
Right. I'll definitely say a prayer for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to, just for privacy reasons, don't want to share his name, but sure. Yeah, you can just say Jeremy's cousin. I'm sure God will know.
Yeah, definitely.
So, anyway, well, thanks everyone for joining us. We've had a few people come along, and that's been fun. And thanks for hopping in, Wes. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversations. I appreciate the kind words, and I would only say glory to God. I talk a lot, and thank God can use my many words. If I was more holy, I would be more succinct, but I'm stuck with loquacity. So thankfully God works with it.
Well, I have appreciated your words, and it's been great hanging out. So good to see you again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I have enjoyed your insights as well, your background. I'm sure I hope we have more conversations in the future. I think it's a beautiful thing to see you come into Orthodoxy, and that it's touching your heart and healing you, and I will pray for you and your family as well.
Thanks, my friend. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good night.
You as well. Bye.
See you. That's funny. There was a new moment. I did not end the stream. I just exited the studio. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming by. God bless you.